There is a shot at the very end of The Legend of Korra where two women stand at the mouth of a spirit portal, take each other's hands, turn to face one another, and step into the light together. And for years before that shot existed, a part of the audience had insisted it was coming and had been told, gently and not so gently, that they were reading too much into it. Then it happened. And a few days later, the men who made the show sat down and wrote in plain words that yes, it was real, it was always going where you thought. That is what tonight is, fan theories about Avatar that stopped being theories. The guesses that turned out to be true, the quiet reads the writers were nodding at the whole time. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Before we go anywhere, I want to lay down one rule, because it is the rule this whole video lives or dies on, and it is the thing most videos on the subject get wrong. There are three completely different things that all get shoved under the same word, theory, and if you blur them together, you end up telling people that something happened in a story when it never did. The first thing is canon. That is a fact. It is a thing that demonstrably occurs on screen, or in a comic the creators have said counts, or in a direct statement from the people who made it. When I say Zuko was banished, that is canon, and I will say it plainly. The second thing is interpretation. That is a reading, an argument about what a scene means, and it is the part I love most, because it is where the story gets to be more than its plot. But I am never going to hand you an interpretation dressed up as a fact. When I am reasoning about meaning, you will hear me say the show implies, or read this way, or the argument here is. The third thing is speculation, a guess that has never been confirmed, and when we are in that territory, I will tell you, every single time, that nothing official backs it up. Fans thought this. It has not been proven. It might be nothing. I am telling you this up front because the fun of this particular topic is watching guesses climb from that third category up into the first. A thing that starts as fans thought this and ends sometimes years later as the official story. And there are a handful of famous ones that never made the climb at all, that people still repeat as if they were confirmed. And we will spend the last stretch of the night gently setting those down. But we start with one of the cleanest examples the franchise has, a death the show refused to show you, and then admitted to in a caption. His name was Jet, and if you watched Avatar as a kid, he is probably filed in your memory as one of the tragedies you did not fully understand at the time. He is a freedom fighter, an orphan of the Fire Nation's war, charismatic and wounded and dangerous in a way the show is honest about. He leads a band of other orphans, and Katara is briefly taken with him. And then he reveals he is willing to drown an entire village full of innocent people to get at a handful of Fire Nation soldiers. And the group leaves him behind. That could have been the end of him. Instead, the writers brought him back for a second, quieter arc in Ba Sing Se, one where he is trying, genuinely trying, to be a better person. And it is precisely at the moment he has turned toward the light that the city destroys him. In the episode Lake Laogai, the 17th chapter of Book 2, Jet is caught by Long Feng, the man who really runs Ba Sing Se from the shadows. And in the fight, he is struck down by a piece of earthbending, and he goes down hard, and he does not get up. Here is what the show does, and it is such a specific piece of craft that it is worth slowing down on. Jet is lying there, badly hurt, and he tells his friends he will be fine, and Toph is standing right there. Toph, whose whole gift beyond earthbending is that she can feel a lie in the vibrations of a person's body. She can feel a heartbeat skip. And when Jet says he will be fine, Toph goes still, and she says, low and certain, that he is not telling the truth. She does not spell it out. She does not say the word. But every adult in the audience understood exactly what that beat meant. His friends carry him away, and we never see him again, and the series simply moves on. The reason it is staged that way, half in shadow, is not artistic cowardice. It is a broadcast standard. This was a Nickelodeon show made for children, and the network did not want a child character to die on screen in front of children. So the writers built a death that a 9-year-old could read as an injury and an adult could read as exactly what it was, and they trusted Toph's lie detection to carry the weight for anyone paying attention. And for a while, that ambiguity became a genuine fan argument. Did Jet die? Some people were sure, others held out hope, and the creators, to their credit, did not leave it a mystery forever, though the way they confirmed it is almost funny. When the episodes were rebroadcast with a pop-up commentary track, the sort of thing that puts little trivia bubbles at the bottom of the screen, one of those captions during that scene read, and I am quoting the caption here, For the record, Jet is dead. 4 words, no ceremony, for the record. And that is the confirmation. Not a dramatic reveal, not a funeral, just the writers finally saying out loud the thing they had staged so carefully. And then, and this is the part I find genuinely lovely, the show made a joke about its own evasiveness. Late in Book 3, there is an episode called The Ember Island Players, where the gang watches a theatrical version of their own adventures, and the play keeps getting things slightly wrong in ways that sting. At one point, the subject of Jet comes up, and the characters themselves cannot quite remember or agree on what happened to him, and it is played for a laugh, a little wink at exactly the confusion the writers had created 2 seasons earlier. The series knew it had been vague, it knew fans were arguing, and instead of pretending otherwise, it grinned about it. Jet is the cleanest possible version of tonight's whole idea, a thing the audience suspected that the text hinted at and then declined to state, that turned out to be exactly true and got confirmed in the smallest, driest way imaginable. For the record, stay with Book 2 for a moment because there is a question the show handed the audience very early and made us wait a long time to answer. And the answer, when it came, was worse than most of the guesses. The question is Zuko's scar. When you first meet the banished prince, the burn across the left side of his face is just part of his design, a mark that makes him look older and harder than he is. And the story is in no hurry to explain it. You watch him chase the Avatar across the world, obsessed to the point of self-destruction, and you assume, the way anyone would, that the scar is a battle wound, the kind of thing a soldier picks up. Maybe he lost a fight. Maybe it was Zhao, the rival who so clearly hates him. Maybe it was a training accident, a bit of firebending gone wrong. Those were the common reads, and they are all, every one of them, wrong. And the truth is one of the ugliest single revelations in the series. It comes in an episode called The Storm, the 12th chapter of Book 1, and it comes through flashback, which is the show's way of letting you feel the memory the way Zuko carries it. When Zuko was 13, he was allowed to sit in on a war council, a meeting of Fire Nation generals, on one strict condition, that he stay silent. He was there to watch and learn, nothing more. But then one of the generals laid out a plan that involved sacrificing a division of new Fire Nation recruits, their own young soldiers, using them as bait to be slaughtered, so that a more experienced force could win the position. And Zuko, 13 years old and not yet the hardened figure you meet in the first episode, could not keep quiet. He spoke out. He said it was wrong to throw away the lives of loyal men who had not even had a chance to fight. And in the Fire Nation, speaking out of turn in that room was treated as a challenge, a disrespect that had to be answered in an Agni Kai, a formal fire duel. Zuko accepted, thinking he would be facing the general whose plan he had insulted. But when he turned to face his opponent, it was not the general, it was his own father. Fire Lord Ozai had decided that the disrespect was not to the general at all, but to him, because it was his war room, and so he would be the one to duel his 13-year-old son. And Zuko, realizing this, dropped to his knees and refused to fight. He begged his father's forgiveness. He said he only had love and respect, that he would never fight him. And Ozai told him that he would learn respect, and that suffering would be his teacher, and he pressed a burning hand to his son's face in front of the assembled court. Then he banished him and told him he could only return home if he captured the Avatar, a task everyone in that room understood to be impossible, because the Avatar had been gone for 100 years. I want to stay with how completely that reframes the character, because it is the engine of everything Zuko does. That obsessive chase you watched in Book 1, the one that looked like ambition, is actually a child trying to earn his way back to a father who marked him and threw him out. The scar is not a war wound. It is a message his father left on his face, a permanent reminder that he was too soft, too kind, too much like a decent person to belong in the world Ozai was building. And the reason so many fans guessed wrong for so long is that the show lets you believe the ordinary explanations precisely so the real one can land like a physical blow. Nobody wants the answer to be that a father did this to his own son for the crime of caring about strangers. But that is the answer, and it is canon, stated plainly in The Storm. And it is the reason Zuko's eventual turn away from his father is not a plot twist but a healing. There are a couple of tangled up ideas worth untangling here because people fold them together. The scar has nothing to do with the disappearance of Zuko's mother, Ursa, which is a separate mystery the show carries and the comics eventually resolve, and we will get to her. And Zuko did not lose a duel to get that scar. He refused the duel entirely. There was no fight. That distinction matters because a boy who fought his father and lost is a very different figure from a boy who knelt and would not raise his hands, And it is the second one, the one who refused, whose whole story is about slowly learning that the code he was raised in is a lie. Now the man who eventually helped Zuko out of that lie is his uncle. And Iroh is where a cluster of fan theories live, some confirmed, some half-confirmed, and one that people state as fact that the show is far more careful about. Iroh is, on the surface, a fat, cheerful old man who loves tea and terrible jokes and gets underestimated by everyone, and that is exactly the disguise the character is built as. Underneath, he is a supremely powerful and deeply spiritual figure, arguably the wisest in the entire world. And the theories about him are mostly attempts to explain how a Fire Nation general became this gentle, wise person when the rest of his family produced Ozai and Azula. The core of it is his son. Iroh had a son named Lu Ten, and Lu Ten died during Iroh's siege of Ba Sing Se, the great campaign that was supposed to be Iroh's crowning achievement as a general. And the loss broke him, and he abandoned the siege, and he was never the same commander again. That much the show tells you. What the wider canon adds, and here I want to be careful about how firm it is that after Lu Ten's death, Iroh journeyed into the spirit world. And the reason often given is that he was looking for his son, unable to accept that he was simply gone. The idea is that Iroh went seeking the dead and instead learned that the spirit world is not a land of the dead at all. And in that journey, he did not find Lu Ten but found himself, and came back with the spiritual depth that defines him afterward. His spiritual mastery is solid canon. The precise motive, the searching for Lu Ten, is softer, closer to a rumor the extended material phrases carefully, and I am not going to sell it to you as a dramatized, on-screen fact, because it is not. It is the kind of backstory that lives in the edges. There is one thing about Iroh and the spirit world that gets confused constantly, and I want to correct it because you will see it stated wrongly everywhere. In the Book 1 finale at the North Pole, the person who physically crosses into the spirit world is not Iroh. It is Aang. Iroh is present at that battle, and he does something crucial. He tries to protect the moon and ocean spirits, and he warns Zhao not to touch them, but he does not make the spiritual journey himself. That is Aang's arc. Do not let the two blur together. The theory about Iroh that did climb all the way into confirmed canon is a slower, sweeter one, and it is about a secret society. Watch closely in a Book 2 episode, The Desert, and you will see Iroh sit down to a game of Paisho, the tile game, with a flower merchant, and he opens by placing the white lotus tile in the center of the board, and the stranger responds in kind, and suddenly the two of them are speaking a code that has nothing to do with the game. Fans clocked this immediately as some kind of hidden network, and they were exactly right. It pays off in the finale, Sazon's Comet, when a group of the greatest masters alive in the world, Iroh, King Bumi, the waterbending master Pakku, the firebending deserter Zhong, and Zuko's old sword teacher Piandao, converged to liberate Ba Sing Se from Fire Nation control. They are the Order of the White Lotus, an ancient society devoted to sharing knowledge and philosophy across the four nations. Above the politics of war, and Iroh is revealed to be its Grand Lotus, its highest-ranking member. The seed in that quiet Paisho game in the desert grows into the group that takes back the greatest city in the world. That is foreshadowing paid off in full. And it is one of the tidiest examples of the show trusting its audience to notice a small thing and remember it seasons later. And Iroh's spiritual nature gets a final confirmation much later in The Legend of Korra, when Korra crosses over and finds Iroh living there, permanently, throwing tea parties for wandering spirits, having left the physical world by his own choice rather than by an ordinary death. He is exactly who the ATLA fans believed he was, a man so at peace with the spirits that he made his home among them. The theory that Iroh was spiritually deeper than any other human in the story was never really in doubt by the end, but it is nice that the sequel walked back and made it literal. There is a villain in Book 3 who never gets a name, and the story of what fans called him and what the show eventually settled on is a small, perfect example of how this series treated its audience like collaborators. He is an assassin Zuko hires to hunt Team Avatar, a huge silent man with a mechanical arm and a mechanical leg and a strange third eye tattooed on his forehead, and he can do something no other firebender in the series can do. He does not throw fire. He aims with that third eye and generates an explosion at a distance, a focused blast of destruction that can level rock and blow apart a bridge. He is terrifying precisely because he is so quiet and so relentless, and because his power feels like a rifle in a world of thrown punches. The show for a while does not name him, and neither could the characters, so in the episode The Runaway, the 7th chapter of Book 3, Sokka and Aang start calling him Sparky Sparky Boom Man, which is exactly the kind of name Sokka would invent, and it stuck with a chunk of the fan base for years. Eventually, the group lands on the more sensible Combustion Man, and that is the name that ended up in the credits and in the wider material, but here's the thing that is genuinely canon and that people get wrong. He is never given a real name. Not in the story, not after. Combustion Man is a description, not a name. The character is deliberately left as a faceless instrument of violence, and the joke name the heroes gave him is as close to a true name as he ever gets. The mechanics of what he does are worth understanding because they set up a callback years later. Combustion bending works by channeling chi from the stomach up and out through that point on the forehead, and the third eye tattoo marks the exit, the muzzle, so to speak, which means the tattoo is not the source of his power. It is the aperture, and it is also his single fatal weakness. If you disrupt the point on his forehead at the moment he is building a blast, the energy has nowhere clean to go, and it detonates inside him instead of out at his target. And that is exactly how he dies, in the Western Air Temple, the 12th chapter of Book 3, when Sokka, of all people, with his boomerang, of all things, strikes that forehead point mid-charge, and the explosion backfires. This coldly mechanical killer, the closest thing the show has to a rifle, is undone by a curved throwing stick and a well-aimed hit to the one spot that matters. Now here's where it becomes a theory that paid off, though it is more of a deliberate creator callback than a fan guess. Years later, in The Legend of Korra, in the 3rd season, there is a member of a group of dangerous criminals called the Red Lotus, a woman named Pili, and she is a combustion bender. The same third eye tattoo, the same technique of firing focused explosions from the forehead, the same devastating range, and in a parallel that is almost too neat to be accidental, she meets a very similar end, killed in the 12th chapter of her own series' season in the vicinity of an air temple, when her forehead is disrupted at the wrong moment. The writers were clearly winking at the fans who had spent years fascinated by the nameless assassin, and they built his one-of-a-kind ability into a bloodline of technique that spans both shows. I want to be honest about the limit of it, though, because people overread this. There is no story connecting Pili to Combustion Man. She is not his daughter, not his student, not part of some secret combustion-bending order. The link is thematic, a rhyme the creators wrote on purpose, not a hidden family tree. And the tattoo, in both cases, is a targeting mark and a vulnerability, not a magic sigil that granted the power. That part, the idea that the tattoo makes the bending possible, is a fan invention that the show never supports. Let me pull one more thread out of Book 2 because it is the kind of setup that looks like mystical background dressing on a first watch and turns out to be load-bearing. In an episode simply called The Guru, Aang travels to meet an old spiritual master named Pathik, who offers to help him master the avatar state by opening his chakras, the 7 energy centers of the body. And the show treats this seriously, one chakra at a time, each blocked by a specific fear or attachment that Aang has to release. He works through 6 of them. Grief, guilt, shame, all of it. He lets go, one by one. And it is genuinely moving to watch a 12-year-old confront that much of himself. And then he hits the 7th, and the 7th is the one about love. And to open it, Pathik tells him he has to let go of his earthly attachment, which for Aang means his attachment to Katara. And at the exact moment he is trying to release it, Aang has a vision of Katara in danger, captured, and he cannot do it. He will not let her go. He tears himself out of the meditation to fly off and save her, and in doing so he leaves the 7th chakra locked, and Pathik warns him with real weight that if he does this, if he blocks that final chakra, he will not be able to enter the avatar state at all. He is trading his access to his greatest power for his love of one girl. Fans caught immediately that this was not a throwaway lesson. It was a gun on the mantelpiece. And it goes off in the very next episode, the Book 2 finale, The Crossroads of Destiny. Under Ba Sing Se cornered, Aang tries to do the thing he was warned he could no longer safely do. He opens himself to the avatar state deliberately, reaching for that power to save the day, making himself, for a few seconds, more open and more vulnerable than any other state a person can be in. And Azula, watching, waits for exactly that moment and shoots him in the back with lightning. He dies. For a moment, he genuinely dies, and because he died while entering the Avatar state, the whole reincarnation cycle nearly ends right there. That last point is a world rule worth stating clearly, because it is one of the ones people get muddled. The Avatar state is the Avatar channeling the combined power and knowledge of every past life, and the rule, first laid out at the start of Book 2 by the spirit of the past Avatar Roku, is brutal in its simplicity. If the Avatar is killed while in the Avatar state, the cycle ends. Permanently. No more reincarnation, no future avatars, ever. So when Azula's lightning hits Aang mid-transformation, she is not just killing a boy, she is potentially killing the Avatar itself, forever. And the show knows it, and it is the closest the series ever comes to actually ending the world. What saves it is water. Katara had collected a small amount of spirit water from the spirit oasis at the North Pole. Water with healing properties back in the Book 1 finale, and she uses it here to revive him. He comes back. But that whole catastrophe was set up an episode earlier in a scene about chakras that a lot of first-time viewers half tuned out. The theory that Pathic's warning was the finale's mechanism was correct, and it is a masterclass in planting. Not every confirmed theory in this show is dark. Some of them are gentle, and one of the gentlest is about a spirit and a lie that turned out not to be a lie. Book 3 has an episode called The Painted Lady, and it starts with Katara doing something a little out of character. The group passes a village on a river, a poor fishing village whose water has been poisoned by a Fire Nation factory upstream, whose people are sick and starving, and Katara cannot walk away from it. So at night she disguises herself, painting her face and wrapping herself in robes, and she goes out onto the water pretending to be a local river spirit called the Painted Lady, a figure the villagers pray to, and under that disguise she heals the sick and drives off the soldiers and eventually helps destroy the factory that was killing the river. For most of the episode, it plays as a story about a good person doing good under a comforting fiction, and there is a slight ache to it because the villagers believe a spirit is watching over them, and the audience knows it is just a teenage girl with paint on her face and a kind heart. Katara herself is troubled by the deception. She is impersonating something she does not believe is really there, and that is exactly why the ending is so satisfying. After Katara has done everything she can and is leaving, the real Painted Lady appears to her. The actual river spirit, the genuine one, materializes and thanks Katara for what she did for the people who had been praying to her. A spirit who could not act directly, but whose worshippers were finally helped by a stranger wearing her image. It is a small moment, easy to miss, and it recolors the whole episode. Katara thought she was telling a beautiful lie. She was not. The Painted Lady was real the entire time, and Katara had been, without knowing it, doing the spirit's work. Fans who wondered whether the ending was confirming the spirit as real or just giving Katara a comforting hallucination have their answer in the framing. The show presents her as an actual spirit who appears, thanks Katara, and departs. She is a genuine part of the world. And I will note one thing people get wrong here, because the Avatar world has a lot of spirits and they blur together. The Painted Lady is not a great cosmic power like the spirits of the moon and ocean. She is a local river spirit, tied to that one polluted river, the Jianghui. And her scale is small and human and regional, which is part of what makes the moment tender rather than grand. A little spirit thanking a little girl for saving a little village. Now we come to the theory that the fans and the creators actually argued about and still argue about, and it is the biggest structural criticism the show has ever faced. It is the lion turtle. If you have not seen the ending of Avatar, here is the shape of the problem without too much detail. Aang, the pacifist, the boy raised by monks who believe all life is sacred, spends the entire final stretch of the series wrestling with an impossible dilemma. To end the war and save the world, everyone tells him he has to kill Fire Lord Ozai, and Aang cannot accept that. Every mentor he consults, living and dead, tells him there is no other way, that his personal morality is a luxury the world cannot afford. And Aang goes into the final battle without a solution, still refusing to become a killer. And then, shortly before the climax, a colossal ancient creature called a lion turtle, a being older than the nations, rises out of the sea, and in a single night teaches Aang a lost technique called energy bending, the ability to bend the energy inside another person. And Aang uses it in the finale to strip Ozai of his firebending permanently, neutralizing him without killing him, resolving the impossible dilemma. And a large part of the audience on first watch felt cheated. It looked like the definition of a last-minute miracle, a solution that dropped out of the sky exactly when the hero needed it, with no setup. The technical term people reached for is a deus ex machina, a god from the machine, an unearned save. Here is where the theory and the creator response get interesting, because Brian Konietzko, one of the two creators, has directly addressed this, and his answer is that the lion turtle was not a last-minute invention at all. He has said the lion turtle was in the show's original pitch from the very beginning, and that its role in the ending was planned that early. And once you know to look, the creature is planted throughout. An early version of the opening title sequence showed a giant lion turtle looming behind Aang. There is a lion turtle statue standing outside the Earth Kingdom Palace in Ba Sing Se, visible in Book 2. Piandao, Sokka's swordmaster, compares Sokka to a lion turtle and keeps related imagery around. The animal was seated across the whole series for anyone paying attention, so the deliverer of the solution was foreshadowed carefully for years. But I want to be straight with you, because this is one of those cases where both sides are partly right, and the tidy defense is not the whole truth. The creature was foreshadowed. The technique was not. Energy bending, the specific ability that lets Aang solve his dilemma, is introduced for the first time in the finale itself. You never hear about it, never see a hint of it, until the lion turtle explains it in the last hour. So the criticism is not wrong just because the lion turtle was planned. The animal appearing is set up. The actual mechanism that saves Aang's conscience, is new. And I think the honest read is that the show planted the messenger but not the message, and that reasonable people can watch that ending and feel either that it was earned or that it was a little too convenient, and both of them are looking at something real. What is not true is the harsher version that the writers panicked and made it up at the last second. They did not. They just held one card back longer than some viewers found fair. There is a related detail worth a small caution. You will sometimes hear that the great knowledge spirit in the library, Wan Shu Tong, actually names or mentions the lion turtle as further proof of the setup. I would be careful with that one. The safe, verifiable statement is that lion turtle imagery appears throughout the franchise. Whether there is a spoken reference in the library is shakier, and rather than reach for a specific claim I cannot stand fully behind, I will just leave it at the imagery, which is well documented and plenty. Since we are near the library, let me stay there, because it is the source of one of the show's best examples of a plan that grows out of a single visit to a strange place. There is a Book 2 episode titled The Library, and the group finds a vast hidden library out in the desert, sinking slowly into the sand, guarded by a spirit named Wan Shi Tong, which means he who knows 10,000 things. He is an enormous owl, ancient and cold, a knowledge spirit who has spent uncounted years collecting all the information in the world, and he lets mortals in only if they come to learn for its own sake. He despises people who want knowledge in order to gain an advantage, to win wars, to hurt each other. And Team Avatar, of course, has come for exactly that reason. They want something they can use against the Fire Nation, and when Wan Shi Tong figures that out, he turns on them and begins to sink the entire library into the sand to keep its contents away from the war forever. But before the library goes down, Sokka finds what he came for. In a room with a great mechanical planetarium, a model of the heavens, he learns about a day, long in the past, that the Fire Nation considered its darkest, a day when a solar eclipse blotted out the sun. And Sokka, being Sokka, immediately understands the implication, because he has watched what the full moon does for waterbenders and what its absence does to them. If firebenders draw their power from the sun, then during a solar eclipse, when the sun is covered, they would lose their fire entirely. For a few minutes, the most powerful army in the world would be defenseless. That single realization, pulled from a sinking library, becomes the entire strategy of Book 3. It grows into the Day of Black Sun, the invasion plan, where Aang and a small allied force attempt to strike at the Fire Nation capital during the eclipse, in the window when Ozai and his soldiers cannot bend. Fans sometimes talk about the library as a standalone adventure episode, a fun detour, but it is nothing of the kind. It is the hinge. The cause sits in Book 2, and the effect detonates in Book 3, and the mechanism, the eclipse removing firebending, is a clean mirror of the show's other celestial rule, the way the moon governs water. Wan Shi Tong, incidentally, is another character the sequel brings back, still bitter, still guarding his knowledge, which tells you the show considered him too good to leave buried in the sand. Now I want to turn to a character whose ending was so thoroughly foreshadowed that on a rewatch it becomes almost unbearable to watch, because you can see it coming from the first time she smiles. Azula. Zuko's younger sister is introduced as the perfect Fire Nation weapon. A prodigy, a lightning bender, a strategist, beautiful and terrifying, and seemingly without a single crack in her. For most of the series, she is the one who never loses her composure, the one who wins, the cold counterpart to her brother's constant turmoil. And the theory a lot of viewers carried, especially rewatching, was that this perfection was a shell, that a person that controlled and that starved of love had to be holding something terrible underneath, and that the show was quietly building toward her collapse. And it was. The clearest planted seed is in an episode from Book 3 called The Beach, which is a strange, wonderful episode where the villains, Azula and her friends, Mai and Ty Lee and her brother Zuko, are just teenagers on vacation, out of their armor, trying and mostly failing to act like normal young people at a party. And away from the war, away from the roles that define her, Azula is revealed to be socially hopeless. She does not know how to talk to people. She does not know how to be liked. She tries to flirt, and it comes out as a threat. And in a quiet moment, she says the line that the entire ending rests on. She says that her own mother thought she was a monster, and then she adds, and this is the knife, that her mother was right, of course, but it still hurt. She says it almost lightly, as if it does not matter, and it is the closest this seemingly invulnerable girl ever comes to breaking open, and it tells you everything. Under the perfection is a child who decided long ago that she was unlovable, and built a fortress of control on top of that wound. The payoff comes in the finale, in the last two parts of Sazin's Comet. By then, everything Azula relied on has been stripped away. Her father, Ozai, whose approval was the only prize she ever wanted, leaves her behind, essentially discards her when he goes off to burn the Earth Kingdom, and he names her Fire Lord almost as a consolation, which is worse than an insult. And then Mai and Ty Lee, the two friends she thought she controlled through fear, betray her because it turns out fear is not the same as loyalty. And with those two supports gone, the fortress comes down. She becomes paranoid. She starts banishing servants over nothing. She hallucinates. She cannot tell who is against her. And the final trigger, the thing that shatters her completely, is a vision. She sees her mother, Ursa, in a mirror, and the hallucinated mother tells her that she loves her. And Azula cannot bear it, because it contradicts the entire architecture of herself. She built herself on being the monster her mother could not love, and now the Phantom is saying she was loved after all, and the contradiction breaks her mind. In her final duel with Zuko, her firebending is wild, sloppy, desperate, everything her cold precision used to be the opposite of. And Zuko, for once, is the calm one. The collapse is total. The foreshadowing there is unmistakable and deliberate. The show planted the line in The Beach and paid it off in the finale, and it did it with real craft. I do want to draw one careful boundary, though, because it is easy to overstate. The on-screen setup is clearly intentional. The stronger claim you sometimes hear, that the creators had every beat of Azula's psychology mapped out from the start, is closer to speculation, and I will not assert it. And one more thing, because the comics complicate it. The hallucinated mother says Ursa loved her, and in the series that plays as a cruel contradiction, but the extended material actually suggests Ursa's real feelings were far more tangled than Azula believed, that the monster red was Azula's own distortion more than Ursa's verdict. Her mother did not simply think she was a monster, Azula thought her mother did, which is a sadder and more complicated thing. And it is the kind of nuance the franchise kept excavating long after the story ended. Let me back all the way up to the premise of the show, because even the setup rewards a second look. and there are theories tucked into the very first episode that the later material confirms. Aang, the Avatar, was found frozen in a block of ice, alive after 100 years. That is not a twist, it is the opening, but the how and the why of it are worth understanding. When Aang was a boy before the war, he ran away from home overwhelmed by the burden of being the Avatar, and he was caught in a terrible storm at sea. And in that moment of drowning terror, he triggered the Avatar state without meaning to, and it encased him and his sky bison Appa in a sphere of ice, which preserved his life for a century while the world above him fell apart. The Avatar state kept him alive, which is a mercy, but the later canon adds a bitter footnote to it. Those 100 years in the ice were not free. They drained his life energy and are understood to be part of why Aang died relatively young, around 66, when a person in that world might expect to live much longer. The ice that saved the world by preserving the Avatar also quietly shortened the life of the boy inside it. Fans who suspected the frozen century carried a cost were right, and the sequel makes that cost explicit. There is a related figure who bends the rules of age in the other direction, and that is King Bumi. When Aang wakes up, everyone he ever knew is 100 years dead, except that in an early episode he goes to the city of Omashu and meets its king, an ancient, wild, cackling old man, and it turns out to be Bumi, Aang's childhood friend, now well over 100 years old and still a powerful earthbender, still, in his words, a mad genius. It is one of the loveliest emotional beats in Book 1, the idea that one friend survived, that Aang is not completely alone in time, and people have always wondered how Bumi lived that long. The honest answer is that the original show does not give you a hard mechanism. It does not explain his longevity with any rule. He is simply extraordinarily old and extraordinarily spry, and the show lets that be a kind of magic without a manual. There is a line in the later live-action adaptation about eating well, but that is the live-action's invention, not the original's canon, and I will not import it. In the series you love, Bumi's age is a gift the story gives you without a receipt. There are two animal companions in this story, and both attract a theory, and one of the theories is true and one is false, and it matters to get them the right way around. Appa, the sky bison, is treated by the show as the last of his kind, or at least the last known flying bison, because the sky bison were the companions and first teachers of the air nomads. And when the Fire Nation exterminated the air nomads, they exterminated the bison too. So Appa carries this weight of being a survivor of a genocide, the last great gentle animal of a murdered people. And that framing is canon, and it is part of why the episode where Appa is stolen hits so hard. But Momo, the little winged lemur who joins the group in the abandoned southern air temple, is a different case. And here the common belief is wrong. People often say Momo is the last winged lemur, the last of his species, a mirror to Appa. The story never confirms that. And in fact, the sequel undercuts it directly, because winged lemurs are shown alive and thriving decades later near Republic City, which means they are not extinct at all. So do not carry the sad little idea that Momo is the last of his kind, because the world is kinder than that. Appa, last of the bison. Momo, not the last of the lemurs. Get them the right way around and the world makes more sense. Now let me turn to a romance the show handled with a very light hand, so light that it became a decade-long argument. And the argument is mostly settled if you know where to look. It concerns Toph, the blind earth-bending prodigy who joins the group in Book 2, and it concerns Sokka. Toph is the last person you would expect to carry a crush. She is abrasive, she is proud, she mocks everyone, she presents herself as needing no one. But watch the way she is around Sokka, and there is something softer underneath the sarcasm, and fans picked up on it early. This idea that tough, sardonic Toph might have secretly fallen for the goofy non-bender who tells bad jokes. The clearest single beat lands in an episode titled The Serpent's Pass. The group is crossing a dangerous body of water, and Toph, who cannot see and who is nearly helpless in deep water because her earth sense does not work there, falls in and is pulled out. And in the confusion and relief, she thinks she has landed in Sokka's arms. And she turns and gratefully kisses the person holding her, except it is not Sokka. It is Suki, the Kyoshi warrior, and Toph has kissed the wrong person entirely, and she is mortified. It is played for a laugh, but it is a very specific laugh, because it only works if Toph wanted it to be Sokka. And the creators have confirmed this reading directly. They describe that moment as their little acknowledgement of a Toph and Sokka romantic thread, of Toph having this small crush on him. So the theory that Toph likes Sokka is not a fan overreach. It is confirmed by the people who made the show, planted on purpose as a one-sided thing, a crush that stays a crush. Because here is the crucial part, and it sets up one of the biggest false beliefs we will clear away later. The crush is real, and it is one-sided, and it never becomes a relationship. Sokka does not return it. Sokka ends up with Suki, the very person Toph accidentally kissed. And Sokka and Suki are a confirmed, lasting couple, from the moment they meet on Kyoshi Island through the events of the comics. Toph's feelings for Sokka are a sweet, sad little undercurrent that the show acknowledges and then, respectfully, lets go nowhere. Because not every crush is meant to be a romance, and the story was wise enough to know that. Hold on to that. The crush was real, the relationship was not, because a lot of people have built an entire false family tree on forgetting the difference. We are going to cross now from the original show into its sequel, The Legend of Korra, which is set about 70 years later. And I want to build the bridge properly because the sequel answered a question the first show never even fully asked out loud. Where did bending come from? Watching Avatar, you simply accept that some people can push water and throw fire and move stone, that this is how the world is, and the show gives you the teachers of each art, the animals and spirits that humans learned from. Waterbenders learn from watching the moon and ocean push and pull the tides. Earthbenders learn from the badger moles, blind creatures who move through the earth. Firebenders learn from the dragons. Airbenders learn from the sky bison. That is the origin the first show hands you, and it is beautiful. And for a long time, fans wondered how it all really started, how the very first human came to bend anything at all, and whether the Avatar, the one person who can do all four, had an origin story of their own. The sequel answered it in a 2-part episode simply called Beginnings, and it is one of the boldest things either show ever did, a myth told in a completely different art style like an old scroll come to life. Roughly 10,000 years before Aang, humans did not live on open land at all. They lived on the backs of enormous creatures called lion turtles, the same kind of creature that would one day teach Aang energy bending, and these lion turtles were the true first source of bending. When a human needed to venture down into the dangerous wilds, the lion turtle would temporarily grant them a single element, lending them fire or water or earth or air through energy bending, to be returned when they came home. Bending was a loan, not a birthright. And then there was a man named Wan. Wan stole the power of fire and did not give it back, and through a long journey he ended up separated from the lion turtles living in the wilds. And along the way he did 2 things that made him the first Avatar. He learned the actual forms of firebending not from a lion turtle but from a dragon, the original teacher, which is how the sequel quietly reconciles its own origin story with the first shows. And he encountered the 2 greatest spirits in the world, Rava, the spirit of light and peace and order, and Vatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. These 2 are locked in an eternal struggle, and Wan, through a series of mistakes and corrections, ended up permanently fusing with Rava during a rare cosmic event called a harmonic convergence, becoming a single being, part human and part spirit, with the power to master all 4 elements and the duty to keep Vatu contained. That fusion is the Avatar. When Wan died, Rava was reborn into a new person, and again, and that chain of rebirths is the Avatar cycle. Every Avatar, Aang, Korra, all of them, carries the same spirit of light that first joined with a thief named Wan 10,000 years ago. I find this one of the most satisfying pieces of world building in either series because it does something rare. It takes what looked like a contradiction and turns it into history. On a surface read, you might think, wait, the first show says humans learned bending from animals, and now the sequel says lion turtles granted it. Which is it? But the answer is that it is both, in sequence. First, the lion turtles granted the raw power. Then, after Wan, when humans had bending in themselves permanently, they still had to learn how to shape it, the forms, the discipline, and those they learned from the badger moles and dragons and bison and the moon. The power came from the turtles. The art came from the animals. It is not a retcon that breaks the old lore. It is a prequel that deepens it, and that is a very hard trick to pull off. The Rava and Vatu part carries a rule that becomes load-bearing later, so hold on to it. Those 2 spirits cannot permanently destroy each other. They are eternal opposites, and if one seems to win, the other simply regenerates from inside the victor over time. and balance always returns. Light cannot erase darkness forever, and darkness cannot erase light forever. That is not just poetry, it is a mechanism that the sequel uses to nearly end the world, because if you can free Vaatu at the right cosmic moment, you can flip the whole balance, and someone tries exactly that. But we will get there. Let me start the sequel's confirmed theories with the one that fans actually solved before the show told them, working it out from clues like detectives, which is the most satisfying kind. The first season of The Legend of Korra has a villain named Amon, the masked leader of a movement called the Equalists, ordinary non-benders who resent the power benders hold over the world. And Amon has a terrifying, seemingly impossible ability. He can take a person's bending away permanently with a touch to the face, something that in the entire history of the first show only the Avatar could do through energy bending. And Amon claims his power is a gift from the spirits, that he was chosen, that he is something new and holy. And a lot of viewers did not buy it for a second, and they were right. The theory that spread through the audience while the season was still airing was that Amon was not spiritual at all, that he was a bloodbender. Bloodbending from the first show is the darkest waterbending technique, the ability to seize control of the water inside a living body and puppet it, and the fans noticed the tells. Amon touches people's faces and heads when he takes their bending, as if he is gripping something inside them. In one episode, he strikes during a full moon, the exact condition when bloodbending is strongest. The clues were all there, and the audience assembled them. And when the season finale, an episode called Endgame, finally pulled off the mask, the theory was confirmed in full and then some. Amon was a bloodbender, but the reveal went deeper than the fans had even guessed, because it turned out he was not just any bloodbender, he was a specific person with a specific history that tied the sequel all the way back to the first show's world. His real name was Noatak, and he was the son of a man named Yakane, who had been one of the deadliest criminals in Republic City's history, a bloodbender so powerful he could do it without the full moon, in broad daylight, without even moving his arms, purely with his mind. And Yakane had raised his sons in secret in the frozen north, training them in bloodbending and filling them with his hatred of the Avatar, because Yakane had once had his own bending stripped away by Aang through energy bending, the very technique Amon was now pretending to wield through spiritual grace. So the man claiming to be a spiritual liberator freeing the world from benders was himself as invasive a bender as exists, a bloodbender, the son of a criminal that Aang had personally defeated, running a lie so complete that even his followers did not know what he was. His own waterbending is what finally exposed him, when in a moment of desperation, he instinctively used it to save himself from drowning in front of witnesses. The mask came off twice, the literal one and the deeper one, and the fans had called the shape of it long before. And there is a second half to that reveal that the sharpest viewers also predicted, which is the identity of Amon's brother. Through the first season of Korra, there is a politician named Tarlok, a councilman, smooth and ambitious and increasingly ruthless, who sets himself up as the great opponent of Amon, the man who will save the city from the Equalist threat. And partway through the season, Tarlok reveals a secret of his own. In a confrontation, cornered, he suddenly bloodbends the people around him, freezing them where they stand. And it is a genuine shock because he is supposed to be one of the good guys, or at least one of the establishment figures. And here he is using the one forbidden art nobody will touch, in daylight without a full moon, which is nearly impossible. Fans put it together fast. Two bloodbenders capable of the impossible, full daylight, no moon, both operating in the same city at the same time, both connected to the frozen north. They had to be related, and they were. Tarlok was Yakone's younger son, Noatak's little brother. The two boys had grown up together under their father's brutal training, and where Noatak had run away to become Amon and wage his war on all benders, Tarlok had gone into politics to seize power a different way, and neither knew or admitted that they were fighting a mirror of themselves. The confirmation comes through Tarlok's own flashback in the finale, filling in the whole tragic family history, and it ends the way that kind of story tends to. When the brothers are finally alone together, defeated with nothing left, Tarlok recognizes his brother's presence, recognizes the grip of his bloodbending, and rather than let it all continue, he takes them both out, detonating a hidden explosive and killing the two of them in a single quiet act. A murder and a suicide in one motion, the end of Yakon's poisoned bloodline. The fans who insisted these two masked and unmasked men were brothers were completely right, and the show rewarded the guests with one of its most tragic endings. Now, that Rava and Vaatu rule I asked you to hold on to pays off in the second season of Korra, and it pays off as one of the least reversible things that ever happens in the entire franchise. And it is a piece of lore people get wrong constantly, so I want to be precise. In the second season, Korra's own uncle, a man named Unalaq, turns out to want something monstrous. He wants to free Vaatu, the spirit of darkness, at the next harmonic convergence, and fuse with it himself, becoming a dark avatar, an inverse of everything the avatar is supposed to be, and he very nearly succeeds. At the convergence, Unalaq tears Rava, the spirit of light, the spirit that has been reincarnating since Wan, out of Korra's body, and Vaatu attacks it, and in front of the audience, the light spirit is beaten down and destroyed. Now, remember the rule. Light and darkness cannot permanently destroy each other. The loser regenerates from within the winner. So even as Rava seems to die, a fragment of her survives inside Vaatu, and through the intervention of Tenzin's daughter Jinora, a gifted young airbender who can project her spirit, Rava is found and reborn and re-merged with Korra, and Korra defeats the Dark Avatar and restores balance. Korra gets her bending back, gets the Avatar state back, the world is saved. On the surface, it looks like a full recovery. But it is not, and this is the part I want you to carry away, because it is a truly load-bearing negative fact that the show never undoes. When Rava was destroyed and reborn, the chain was broken. Korra's connection to all of her past lives, every avatar before her, going back through Aang and every predecessor all the way to Wan, was severed permanently in that moment. Rava herself came back. The link to the past avatars did not, and the series is careful and cruel about keeping these two things separate. Korra can bend all four elements again because Rava is reborn, but she can never again speak with Aang or draw on the wisdom of any avatar who came before her, because that thread was cut and stays cut for the rest of the series. She becomes, in a real sense, the first avatar of a new line, a woman who has to face the world without the 10,000 years of ancestors that every avatar before her could lean on. People conflate these all the time. They say she lost her bending and got it back and everything was fine, and that is wrong. Her bending came back. Her lineage did not. She is alone in her own head in a way no avatar had ever been, and the rest of her story is shaped by that loneliness. It is one of the boldest choices the sequel made, to cut its heroine off from the very history the first show spent 3 seasons building, and it never took it back. The third season of Korra gives us a villain who is, in a way, the philosophical opposite of everything the show usually celebrates, and it also gives us a payoff that fans saw coming and still gasped at when it arrived. His name is Zaheer, and he is one of a group of 4 dangerous criminals called the Red Lotus, a darkened version of Iroh's Order of the White Lotus. And Zaheer is something new. He is an airbender, but he was not born one. When the airbenders started returning to the world, Zaheer was one of the ordinary people who suddenly gained the power, and he took to it not as a warrior but as a believer. He is a devotee of the old air nomad philosophy, the real one, the ascetic one, about detachment and the shedding of worldly bonds. And he quotes an ancient airbending guru named Lagima constantly, a man who lived 4,000 years ago. And Lagima, according to the legend Zaheer keeps reciting, could do something no airbender since has done. He could fly, not glide, not ride the wind on a staff, but truly fly, weightless, untethered from the ground. And the poem Zaheer keeps returning to holds the key to how. Let go your earthly tether, it says. Enter the void, empty, and become wind. The idea is that flight is not really a physical technique at all, but a spiritual state, achievable only by a person who has released every single attachment that binds them to the earth, every love, every desire, every reason to stay. And through most of the season, Zaheer talks about this as an ideal he has not reached, because for all his philosophy, he has one tether left. He is in love. There is a woman in the Red Lotus, the combustion bender Pali, the one we spoke about earlier. And Zaheer loves her, and that love is the one earthly bond he cannot let go of. fans saw the shape of it immediately. If flight requires letting go of all attachment and Zaheer's last attachment is Pali, then the story is loading a gun and the trigger is her death. And that is exactly painfully what happens. In the season 3 finale, in the middle of the climactic battle, Pili is killed, right in front of Zaheer, suddenly and brutally. And in his grief, in the moment his last tether is severed, whether he wills it or not, Zaheer becomes weightless. He recites the poem, "Let go your earthly tether, enter the void," and he rises into the air under his own power, flying, only the second person in 10,000 years of history to do it, achieving through the worst loss of his life the very transcendence he had been preaching. It is a horrifying and beautiful scene, because his enlightenment and his devastation are the same event. He got what he wanted by losing what he loved. What I find remarkable about that payoff is how honest it is about the philosophy it is dramatizing. The air nomad's detachment is usually presented in the gentle Aang way, as peace and non-attachment and letting go of grief in a healthy sense. Zaheer takes the same philosophy to its literal, terrible extreme, and the show does not flinch from what that costs. He becomes free precisely because he has nothing left to live for, and his freedom is a kind of emptiness. The theory that Zaheer would fly was correct, and the mechanism the fans predicted, the death of Pali as the final release, was correct. And the story paid it off in a way that makes you never want it to have come true. Let me spend some time now with Toph because she is alive in the sequel, and her story after the first show is one of the richest pieces of legacy in either series, and it contains a fact I need to get exactly right because a lot of people and a lot of videos get it wrong. Toph, in the years after the war, became the new world's foremost lawman. She founded the metal-bending police force of Republic City and served as its first chief. And her metal bending, which she alone could do, became the backbone of law enforcement in the biggest city in the world. In the present day of Korra, that force is led by Toph's own daughter, Lin Beifong, a hard, guarded, deeply competent woman who is one of the sequel's best characters. But I want to go back to how Toph's metal bending began because this is the correction. Toph is the first metal bender in history, the inventor of the entire art, and the reason it works is a piece of world logic the show is careful about. Ordinary earthbenders cannot bend metal because metal is refined, purified, processed out of the earth. But Toph, with her extraordinary sensitivity, her whole body a kind of earth-sensing instrument because of her blindness, realized that refined metal is not perfectly pure. It still holds tiny trace impurities, small bits of unrefined earth locked inside it. And if you are sensitive enough, you can grab those impurities and through them move the metal itself. And here's where she worked it out, because this is the detail that gets mangled. Toph invented metal bending while she was imprisoned in a metal cage. She had been captured by 2 bounty hunters, a man named Xin Fu and an earthbending teacher named Master Yu, who had been hired by Toph's own wealthy parents to drag her back home, because they could not accept their blind daughter running off to travel the world. They locked her in a metal box, thinking it would hold her, thinking a metal bender could not bend what was not earth, because no one could. And trapped in that box, furious and determined, Toph felt the trace earth still hidden in the refined metal, and she bent it, and she tore her way out, and then she trapped the 2 bounty hunters inside the very cage that had held her. That is where metal bending was born. Not in any Fire Nation vehicle, not through some external gift, but inside a cage meant to break her, invented in a moment of pure will by a girl who refused to be sent home. I stress the details because you will hear it told wrong, with the wrong captors in the wrong place, and the truth is better than the wrong version anyway because it is so completely Toph, turning the thing designed to cage her into the greatest breakthrough in the history of her art. Toph appears in person late in Korra. Extremely old now, living alone in a swamp, having walked away from the police force and the city and all of it to be by herself in nature. And she is exactly as blunt and difficult and secretly wise as she ever was. She even helps Korra heal and spars with her, an old master still sharper than almost anyone. And her 2 daughters carry her legacy in opposite directions. Lin became the chief of police, all order and duty. And the younger daughter, Suyin, founded a whole city of her own, a gleaming metal city called Zaofu, all art and freedom and metal bending as a way of life. The two sisters we will come back to because their parentage is the exact spot where one of the biggest false theories in this whole subject lives. Before we get to who is related to whom, let me handle the Airbenders because the return of an entire extinct nation is one of the sequel's central events, and it grew directly out of a question the first show left hanging. Aang was the last Airbender. The Fire Nation had wiped out the air nomads in a single day at the start of the war, using the power of Sazan's comet. And for the entire run of the first show, Aang carries the grief of being the only one of his people left in the world. And the obvious hope, the thing fans wanted, was that somehow the air nomads could come back, that Aang's culture would not simply end with him. And the sequel delivered that in two distinct waves that I want to keep separate, because they get muddled. The first wave is family. Aang and Katara married after the war and had 3 children, and the way those children turned out is itself a quiet piece of lore that fans had wondered about. The question of whether the Avatar's kids would inherit his airbending. The answer was mixed, and it is more interesting for being mixed. The eldest, a son named Bumi, after Aang's old friend, the Mad King, was born a non-bender, no bending at all. The middle child, a daughter named Kaya, after Katara's mother, was a waterbender like Katara. And only the youngest, Tenzin, was born an airbender, the sole heir to Aang's people, which put an enormous weight on one man, the pressure of being personally responsible for keeping an entire culture alive. Tenzin rebuilds the Air Nation as best he can, raising his own children in the old ways, and by the time Korra's story begins, a handful of airbenders exist in the world, all of them Tenzin's direct family. And then comes the second wave, and this is where it connects back to the cosmic events we have already talked about. Remember the harmonic convergence, the once-in-10,000-year event that happened during Korra's second season and reopened the spirit portals. That convergence had an enormous side effect that nobody predicted. All over the world, ordinary non-benders spontaneously gained the ability to airbend. People who had lived their whole lives without any bending at all suddenly woke up with the power of a nation everyone had thought was gone. The Air Nation, effectively, was reseeded across the entire world in a single event, hundreds of new airbenders appearing everywhere, and the third season of Korra is largely about Tenzin and the others trying to find these new airbenders and rebuild a culture from strangers. And the bridge between the two waves, the single most touching case, is Bumi, Aang's own eldest son, the one born with no bending at all. Bumi had spent his entire life as the non-bender in a family of legends, the ordinary son of the Avatar. And then the harmonic convergence hit, and Bumi, an aging man by then, suddenly became an airbender, gaining at last the very power his little brother had been born with, and he had been denied. Imagine carrying that your whole life, being the plain one in a family of miracles, and then late in life receiving the gift after all. It is a lovely, strange piece of writing, and it gently answers the old fan question about the Avatar's bloodline. The airbending did come back into Aang's line, just not in the child anyone expected, and not until a cosmic accident opened the door. The show keeps the genetics soft. It never gives you a hard rule about who inherits what, and I think that is deliberate, because bending in this world has always been as much about spirit and circumstance as about blood. While we are in the founding era, there is a piece of the world people treat as a mystery, and it is simply established backstory, and it is worth stating because it grounds everything the sequel does. Republic City itself, the great modern metropolis where most of Korra takes place, a place of cars and radios and skyscrapers that looks nothing like the world of the first show, was founded by Aang and Zuko together. After the war ended, there was the problem of the old Fire Nation colonies. Lands the Fire Nation had held for generations that were now full of people of mixed heritage with nowhere clean to belong. And rather than simply hand them back or hold them, Aang and Zuko decided to build something new out of them, a place that belonged to no single nation, a home for all 4 peoples, and the ones who were a mix of them. That became the United Republic of Nations, and its capital became Republic City. So the entire setting of the sequel, that whole modern world, is a monument the two former enemies built together, the Avatar and the Fire Lord, turning the spoils of a war into a shared home. It is not a theory, it is history, but it is the kind of history that makes the sequel feel like a true continuation rather than a reboot. Now let me take the sequel's final season because it brings the whole saga to its close, and it turns on a weapon that grows, quite literally, out of the spiritual events of the earlier seasons. After the Airbenders returned and the spirit portals opened, the world was left more entangled with the spirit world than it had been in 10,000 years. And one visible sign of that was the spirit vines, great tangles of spiritual plant life that grew up through parts of Republic City after the portals opened. Most people treated them as a nuisance or a curiosity. But in the 4th season, a scientist and businessman named Varric, working under pressure, discovered that these spirit vines held an incredible concentration of raw energy, and that energy could be harvested and focused into a weapon of terrifying power. The villain of that final season is a woman named Kuvira, who called herself the Great Uniter. In the chaos left by the collapse of the Earth Kingdom's monarchy, Kuvira had marched across the continent with an army, forcibly reuniting the fractured states into a single militarized nation she called the Earth Empire, presenting herself as a bringer of order and revealing herself gradually as a conqueror. And Kuvira got hold of the spirit vine research, and she built the ultimate expression of it, a colossal metal mech suit, a walking machine bigger than a building, armed with a spirit vine energy cannon that could vaporize almost anything it hit. The climax of the entire franchise is Korra and her allies against that giant machine in the streets of Republic City. And here's the beautiful piece of circular writing that closes the whole thing. In the final battle, the spirit vine cannon's energy goes wild, and Korra, to stop it from destroying the city, wraps herself around the runaway beam and channels it. And the blast tears open a brand new spirit portal right there in the middle of Republic City. A third portal, born from the weapon meant to end the war. And it is that very portal, the one blasted into existence by the last battle of the series, that Korra and Asami step into together in the final scene, hand in hand. The instrument of the greatest destruction in the sequel becomes the doorway through which its most hopeful, most human moment walks. The war machine's misfire opens the door that the love story closes on. Let me circle back to the first show for a while, because some of its biggest open questions were never answered on television at all. They were answered in the comics, the graphic novels that the creators worked on directly and have said are canon, which bridge the gap between the two series. And the largest of those questions, the one that hangs over the first show like a held breath, is what happened to Zuko's mother, Ursa. She is a presence you feel throughout the original series without ever really meeting her. Zuko remembers her with aching tenderness, a mother who loved him when his father did not, and then one night, when Zuko was a boy, she simply vanished, and no one would say where she had gone or whether she was alive. The show gives you flashbacks and hints and Zuko's grief, but it never tells you. When the series ends and Zuko has become Fire Lord, one of the very first things he does is go to his imprisoned father and demand to know where his mother is, and the series cuts away before we hear the answer. That was the last note on Ursa the television series ever gave us, a question unanswered deliberately. The comics picked up that exact thread in a story called The Search, and the answer they gave is one of the strangest and most beautiful things in the whole franchise. Ursa, it turns out, was not killed, though for years fans feared she had been. Before she ever married into the royal family, Ursa had been in love with a boy from her village, a young man named Ikem, an ordinary, gentle person. She was forced to leave him and marry Prince Ozai because of her bloodline, because she was a descendant of a previous avatar, and the royal family wanted that lineage. So her whole life in the palace was a kind of imprisonment, married to a cruel man she never loved, longing for the boy she had left behind. And when she was finally forced out of the palace, banished under threat, she made her way back toward her old life, and she came to a strange place called the Forgetful Valley, home to a powerful spirit called the Mother of Faces, a spirit who can give a person an entirely new face. And Ursa made a choice that tells you everything about how much pain she was carrying. She asked the spirit not only to give her a new face so that no one from her old life would recognize her, but to take away her memories, all of them, the palace, Ozai, even her own children, so that she could start a life free of the grief. She became a new woman named Noriko, with a new face and no memory of ever having been a princess or a mother. And she married Ikem, who had also taken a new face, and they lived quietly. And she was, at last, at peace, precisely because she could not remember everything she had lost. When Zuko finally finds her, she does not know him. His mother is standing in front of him, and she has no idea who he is. And the emotional core of the story is Zuko having to decide whether to ask the spirit to give her back her true face and her memories, knowing that means giving her back all the pain she had paid so much to escape. She chooses, in the end, to remember, to take back her real face and her real memories and her son, grief and all. I think the reason that resolution works, and the reason the creators were right to save it for a form where they had the room to tell it properly, is that the obvious answers would all have been smaller. If Ursa had simply been killed, that is a tragedy, but it is a flat one. If she had simply been hiding, that is a relief, but a cheap one. Instead, they gave her a story about how much a person will sacrifice to be free of unbearable memory, and whether a life without your pain is worth living if it also has to be a life without your children. That is not the kind of thing you can resolve in a cutaway at the end of a kid's show, and I respect that they waited until they could do it justice. Ursa is alive. That is the headline the fans wanted, but the shape of how she is alive is far stranger and sadder and richer than anyone guessed. Now let me take a lighter thread, one that is half true and half a lovely fan invention, because it is a good example of how a fandom will build mythology onto a simple fact. Sokka, in the third book of the original series, gets a sword. He is the one member of the core group with no bending at all, the plan guy, the idea guy, the one who feels like he does not measure up to a team full of benders, and in an episode about him seeking out a sword master named Piandao, Sokka forges his own blade. And what he forges it from is remarkable. Earlier, the group had watched a meteor fall from the sky and crash to Earth, and Sokka takes a piece of that meteorite, the raw metal from space, and under Piandao's guidance, he heats it and hammers it into a black sword, a blade made of metal that fell from the heavens. He calls it his space sword, and he is absurdly, wonderfully proud of it, and it becomes his signature weapon for the rest of the show until he loses it, along with his boomerang during the chaos of the prison break at the Boiling Rock late in Book 3. The confirmed part is all of that. The sword is real, it is made from a meteorite, it is black meteoric iron, and space just means, in Sokka's cheerful phrasing, a rock from space. But here is where the fandom built a cathedral on top of a pebble. Because the moon in this world is tied to a person, to Princess Yue, who sacrificed her life at the North Pole to become the new moon spirit. And because Yue was briefly Sokka's first love, some fans spun a beautiful theory that the meteor was somehow connected to the moon, to Yue that she had sent it, that the space sword was mystically linked to the woman Sokka loved and lost, a piece of the heavens she gifted to him. And I understand completely why people want that to be true. It would be poetic almost past bearing, the boy who lost a girl to the sky being handed a weapon by the sky. But there is no canon basis for it whatsoever. The meteor is just a meteor. Space just means space. The link to Yue is something fans wished into the story, and it never climbed out of speculation, and I include it here precisely because not every beautiful theory turns out to be true. And part of being honest about this subject is admitting when a lovely idea is only that, an idea. The sword is real. The romance behind it is a dream the fans dreamed, and the story never dreamed it with them. That is a good moment to talk about the cabbage merchant because he is the purest case of the two kinds of theory sitting right on top of each other. One confirmed and one that never will be. And people mix them up all the time. If you watch the first show, you remember him even if you do not remember his name because he does not have one. He is the poor vendor whose cart of cabbages gets destroyed over and over in the background of the group's adventures. Every catastrophe somehow flattening his produce while he wails his one famous line about his cabbages. He is a running visual gag, nothing more, a bit of recurring slapstick the animators clearly loved, and by the end of the series he has become a strange little fan favorite precisely because the universe seems personally out to get him. And two very different fan ideas grew up around this man. The first, and the one I need to flag hard, is the joke theory that the cabbage merchant is secretly a member of the Order of the White Lotus, that this bumbling vendor is actually a hidden master, that his cabbage cart is a cover for some deeper role in the secret society. It is a fun idea, it spread widely, and I want to be completely clear, it was never confirmed by anyone who made the series. There is no canon behind it at all. The people who worked on the series have described him, in the histories of the story, as purely a running gag, a joke that took on a life of its own and nothing more. So if you have ever seen someone state as fact that the Cabbage Man is a White Lotus operative, that is fandom wishful thinking dressed up as lore. It is not real. Enjoy it as a joke, but do not file it under confirmed. But, and here is the twist that makes him worth including, the Cabbage Merchant does have a confirmed legacy, just not that one. It is about business, not secret societies. The creators at a convention appearance years back teased that the Cabbage Merchant's legacy would live on in some form, and then the sequel paid it off. In The Legend of Korra, in the modern world of Republic City, there is a major corporation called Cabbage Corp, a technology and automobile company, one of the big industrial players in the city. And on screen, Cabbage Corp is run by a man described as the Cabbage Merchant's son, a businessman voiced, in a lovely touch, by the same actor who voiced the original merchant. The comics fill in the middle of the story, showing the merchant himself, late in life, inspired by a piece of machinery to move from selling cabbages off a cart to building vehicles, turning his endlessly destroyed little business into an industrial dynasty. So the man whose cabbages were smashed in every episode became, in the fullness of time, the founder of a corporate empire, and his family sits among the wealthiest in the New World. That is the real, confirmed Cabbage Merchant theory. Not a secret master of a hidden order. A gag character whose descendants got rich. The mundane version turned out to be canon, and the mystical version stayed a joke, and getting those two straight is exactly the kind of care this whole subject demands. Let me turn to the darkest technique in the entire world, because its history threads through both shows and it is the engine behind Amon, and it is worth understanding properly. Bloodbending. In the first show, in a Book 3 episode called The Puppet Master, the group meets a kindly old innkeeper named Hamma, who turns out to be a waterbender, one of the last from the Southern Water Tribe, imprisoned for years by the Fire Nation. And in that captivity, cut off from any water to bend, Hamma made a terrible discovery. There is water inside every living thing, inside the blood, inside the body, and a waterbender powerful enough can seize it. She invented bloodbending, the ability to take control of a person's body from the inside, to puppet their limbs, to override their will entirely. And she uses it on the group. And there is a horrifying scene where she forces Katara herself to bloodbend, turning the technique on its own teacher. The rule the first show establishes is that bloodbending can only be done during a full moon, when a waterbender's power is at its absolute peak, because it takes that much strength to move the water in a living body. And it is treated universally as an abomination, the one water-bending art that decent people will not touch. Katara is so disturbed by having done it that she swears never to do it again. It is the line even the heroes do not want to cross. And then the sequel takes that rule and shows you the exception, the truly dangerous benders who broke it. Yakone, Amon's father, the crime lord we talked about, could bloodbend without a full moon any time he wanted in broad daylight. And worse, he could do it without moving at all, purely with his mind, a psychic version of the technique that is nearly unstoppable. His sons, Noatak, who became Amon, and Tarlok, inherited that monstrous gift. So the sequel's whole first season is built on the darkest secret of the first show's world, the forbidden art, elevated to something even more terrifying than Hamma ever managed. And Amon's great lie, the permanent removal of bending, was itself an application of it. A psychic, blood-bending technique so refined it could sever a person's connection to their bending, mimicking the Avatar's energy bending, which is why fans were right that it had nothing to do with spirits. There is one more piece of bloodbending lore that people get backwards, and it matters because it is about who gets credit for the good in this world. After the war, bloodbending was outlawed. It became illegal in the United Republic of Nations, the new country Aang and Zuko had founded. And the person most responsible for that law was Katara, the same Katara who had been forced to use the technique twice and hated it both times, spent part of her long life advocating against it, and it was through that advocacy that the United Republic banned it. By the time Yakone was put on trial for his blood-bending crimes, decades before Korra's story, it was already illegal. And the councilman who presided over that famous trial was, of all people, Sokka, sitting as a representative in the government of the world he had helped build. I stress this because you will sometimes hear that Aang banned bloodbending, and that is not right. It was Katara's cause, carried through the Republic's council, and it is a lovely, quiet piece of her legacy that the woman who was made to commit the worst act her art allows spent her later years making sure no one else could be forced to. Since we are deep in the mechanics of bending now, let me stay with the techniques for a while, because a whole category of fan curiosity was about the rare and specialized arts, the moves only a handful of people in the world can do. And the sequel answered a lot of those quiet questions about who can do what and how. Take lightning. In the first show, lightning is the deadliest and loveliest firebending skill, a jagged, lethal, blue-white bolt, and only a very few people can produce it. The story is careful, actually, about the difference between two things that people run together, generating lightning and redirecting it, and it matters. Generating lightning, actually creating the bolt, is described as cold-blooded fire, a technique that requires perfect inner calm, a complete absence of emotion because it comes from separating the energy in your own body and letting it snap back together. And the reason it is so rare is that most firebenders are too passionate, too full of rage or fear to reach that stillness. In the whole first series, the people you actually see generate lightning are Ozai, Azula, and Iroh. That is nearly the entire list. Fire Lord Ozai, his prodigy daughter, and the gentle old uncle, which tells you something about Iroh, that the same serenity that made him wise also made him one of the only people alive who could produce the deadliest firebending technique. And then there is redirection, which is a different thing entirely, and it is one of my favorite pieces of invented lore in the series, because of where it came from. Zuko cannot generate lightning. He never can through the whole series, and it eats at him because his sister can and he cannot. One more way their father's favor was unevenly given. But Zuko can redirect it. If someone fires lightning at him, he can catch it, guide it through his body along a safe path, and release it back out, sending the attack away rather than being killed by it. And the origin of that technique is that Iroh invented it, and he invented it by studying waterbenders. Iroh, the firebending master, watched how waterbenders move energy in circles, how they redirect force rather than meeting it head-on, and he adapted that principle to lightning, creating a firebending defense out of a waterbending philosophy. He taught it to Zuko, and Zuko later teaches it to Aang. So this one technique passes from a Fire Nation general who humbled himself to learn from another nation, down through his nephew to the Avatar himself. Aang uses redirection, but Aang, notably, hesitates to ever generate lightning because generating it requires a kind of aggression that goes against his nature. The whole little lineage of that one move, born from Iroh's willingness to learn from an enemy art, is the story quietly arguing its central point, that the four nations are stronger when they learn from each other than when they stay pure. The sequel picked up this thread and gave fans a set of new specialized arts, some of which people had wondered about for years. The biggest one is lava bending, the ability to turn solid earth into molten rock, an art hinted at as theoretically possible but never shown in the first series. Fans had asked, if earthbenders can move stone and firebenders can move heat, could someone do both to earth itself? Could someone melt the ground? And the sequel said yes, and it gave the ability to a member of the Red Lotus named Gazan, who could turn stone to lava with a gesture, and it is a frightening thing to watch the first time you see it. And later it gave the same ability in a much more heroic register to Bolin, one of the main characters, an earthbender who spends most of the series unable to do anything special, and then, in a moment of desperation, discovers he is a lava bender, one of the rare few. So a power fans had only theorized about became not just canon, but a major character's defining breakthrough. I want to add one careful note here about the edges of canon because this subject is exactly where people overreach. There is a beloved past avatar named Kyoshi, a towering, severe woman from centuries before Aang, and there is material suggesting Kyoshi could lava bend among many other feats. But that material comes largely from the novels written later and from lower-tier supplementary sources rather than from the shows themselves, and I think it is only honest to flag that the novels are a softer, more debatable layer of canon than what you see on screen. So when I say lava bending's confirmed practitioners are Gazan and Bolin, I mean confirmed in the shows. Kyoshi doing it lives in a book, and books in this franchise are a step further out from the core than the animation is. It is the kind of distinction that does not matter to a casual fan and matters enormously to the people who will fact-check every sentence. And I would rather be precise than impressive. There are a couple of other specialized arts worth naming quickly because they come up. There is spirit bending, the ability to interact directly with spirits, to purify a spirit that has turned dark or, in the wrong hands, to corrupt one. An art derived from waterbending that Korra's uncle Unalaq used and that Korra herself eventually learns. And there is a completely separate thing that people confuse with it, spiritual projection, which is an airbending skill, the ability to send your spirit out of your body to travel while your body stays behind. And that one belongs to Jinora, Tenzin's gifted daughter, the young airbender who saved Rava. They sound similar, and they are not the same. One is about touching spirits, and one is about your own spirit leaving your body. And keeping them straight is part of respecting how carefully the sequel built its rules. And there is seismic sense, Toph's signature perception, the ability to feel the world through vibrations in the earth, which she learned from the badger moles and which is tied directly to her blindness, her whole body reading the ground the way your eyes read a room. It can be dulled, notably, by anything that insulates her from the earth, sand, the wooden deck of a ship, ice, which is a limitation the first show used cleverly more than once. The reason I run through all of this is that the specialized arts are exactly the territory where fan theory and canon blur, where someone will confidently tell you a character can do something the shows never showed, and the honest map is narrower and, I think, more interesting than the inflated one. Let me go back to the North Pole and to a girl whose ending was written into her from birth because her story is a small masterpiece of foreshadowing that a lot of first-time viewers only understand on a rewatch. Princess Yue of the Northern Water Tribe. She is introduced late in Book 1, a gentle young woman with a striking feature, hair as white as snow, which is unusual, striking against her dark skin and the deep blues of her tribe. And the series makes a point of it, and there is a story behind the hair. When Yue was born, she was sickly and weak, dying, and her father, the chief, carried her to the tribe's most sacred place, the spirit oasis, where the spirits of the moon and ocean live in mortal form as two koi fish circling in a pool. He prayed to the moon spirit to save his dying daughter, and the moon spirit did, giving some of its own life to the infant. And as it did, her hair turned white, the mark of the moon's touch on her. She was, from the very beginning, a child who was alive only because the moon had given part of itself to her. You can probably already feel where this goes, and that is the point, because the story planted it so that the ending would feel like fate rather than surprise. At the climax of Book 1, the Fire Nation Admiral Zhao attacks the North Pole with a specific, monstrous plan. He has learned that the moon spirit lives in that pool as a fish, and that if he kills it, he can wipe out waterbending forever, because waterbenders draw their power from the moon, and he does it. He kills the moon spirit, the koi fish, and in that moment the moon goes dark, the sky drains of color, and every waterbender in the world loses their power, and the tribe faces annihilation. And Yue, who was given her life by the moon spirit as a baby, understands what she has to do. She gives it back. She returns the life the moon lent her, sacrificing herself to become the new moon spirit, her body going still as her spirit rises to take the place of the fish Zhao killed. The moon returns to the sky, waterbending returns to the world, and Yue becomes the pale light that governs the tides and the source of every waterbender's strength forever. The reason I love it as an example is that it is not really a theory anyone had to guess. It is foreshadowing so complete that the ending is encoded in the character's hair. But it functions the way the best confirmed theories function, as a promise the series made early and kept. Everything about Yue, the white hair, the story of her birth, her sadness, her sense of not fully belonging to her own life, was pointing at the moment she would give herself back to the moon. And it ties into the wider rule of the world, the deep link between the moon and water, the sun and fire, that the whole cosmology runs on. Yue did not just die. She became a permanent feature of the sky, and when you see the full moon in any later scene in either series, you are, in a sense, looking at her. She is still up there, still Sokka's first love, still the reason waterbenders can bend at all. That is a kind of immortality most characters never get. Now, I want to do the accounting that fans always want done, The question of who is still alive and who is gone by the time the whole saga ends, because there is a lot of misinformation about it, and some of the confirmed answers are moving in their own right. By the era of the Legend of Korra, 70 years after the first show, the children we followed are old, and the sequel treats their fates with real care. Start with Aang because his is the heaviest. Aang is dead. He died at around the age of 66, which is young for this world, and the reason, as we touched on earlier, is that the 100 years he spent frozen in the ice took a toll on his body, slowly burning through part of his natural lifespan. So the boy who saved the world by surviving a century in the ice paid for it with a shorter life at the other end. And by the time Korra is born, Aang is already gone, a revered memory, a statue, a legacy his children carry. Zuko, though, is alive. Zuko, the banished prince with the scarred face, lives to a great old age, and the sequel brings him back as an elder, a wandering peacekeeper who travels the world on the back of his own dragon, a creature named Druk, helping to keep the peace he spent his youth fighting for. He had long since given up the throne, abdicating as Fire Lord to let the next generation rule. And here's the confirmed answer to a question fans had: the identity of the Fire Lord after Zuko. It is his daughter, Fire Lord Izumi, who reigns during Korra's time. A calm, measured woman who keeps the Fire Nation out of the wars the way her grandfather Ozai never would have. Izumi even has a son named Iroh after Zuko's beloved uncle, who serves as a general. So the name and the spirit of the gentlest man in the first show carries down through the royal line into the sequel. What the story does not tell you, and this is important, is who Izumi's mother is. Fans assume it is Mai, Zuko's girlfriend from the first show, and it is a reasonable guess, but it is never confirmed on screen, and so it stays an assumption, not a fact. I will not tell you Mai is Izumi's mother because the series never did. Katara is alive too, elderly, living in the Southern Water Tribe where the whole story began, having become the healer the whole world reveres. The master waterbender who trained Korra herself and who nursed her back from her worst injuries. There is something fitting in that. The little girl from the first episode of the first show, the one who found Aang in the ice, ending up as the wise old grandmother figure who trains the next avatar. And Toph, as we said, is alive as well, extraordinarily old, having left the world of law and cities behind for a swamp, still the sharpest and most difficult person in any room. So of the core group, 3 of them, Zuko, Katara, and Toph, live to be old in the sequel's era, which leaves Sokka, and Sokka is the hard one, because the honest answer is that we do not fully know. Sokka is dead by the time of the sequel, that much is clear. He is spoken of in the past tense, honored as one of the founders of the New World, a councilman who helped build the United Republic and who presided over Yakine's trial. But the story never tells you how he died, or exactly when. There is no death scene, no stated cause, nothing but the fact of his absence and the respect the survivors show his memory. The reasonable inference, the only one the material supports, is that he died of old age, an ordinary death for a man who lived a full life. And I stress that because there is a popular fan theory, stated far too often as if it were fact, that Sokka was killed by the villain Zaheer, or the Red Lotus. That is not canon. It is not confirmed anywhere. What the sequel actually shows is that Sokka, along with others, helped capture the Red Lotus years earlier when they tried to kidnap the child Korra, and no one is shown dying in that event. So if you have heard that Zaheer killed Sokka, set it down. The truth is quieter and sadder, that Sokka simply grew old and died, sometime before the sequel, in a way the story chose not to dramatize, and the not knowing is its own kind of ache. The boomerang guy, the heart of the first show, gone off screen between the 2 series, mourned but unexplained. One more piece of the accounting because it is a common mistake. Ozai, the tyrant, the man who burned his own son, did not die at the end of the first show. Aang did not kill him. That was the entire point of the lion turtle and energy bending, that Aang found a way to defeat him without killing him, stripping away his firebending and leaving him a powerless man. And then Ozai was imprisoned. He lives on, behind bars, appearing in the sequel comics, as a broken, caged former god king, which is arguably a worse fate for a man like him than death would have been. So the villain lived, powerless and imprisoned, and the hero kept his hands clean. And that, in the end, was the whole moral argument the first show had been building toward. Let me step back from specific plot points for a moment and talk about something that sits underneath all of it, because it is a case where fans figured out the real-world design and the creators confirmed they were reading it right, even though it was never hidden exactly. The 4 nations of Avatar are each built on a real culture from our world, carefully and respectfully, and understanding that changes how you watch the series. The water tribes draw on the Inuit and Yupik peoples of the Arctic, the Parkas, the Igloos, the reverence for the moon, and the hunt. The Earth Kingdom is modeled largely on Imperial China, its architecture, its bureaucracy, the great walled city of Ba Sing Se. The air nomads are drawn from Tibetan Buddhist monks, their robes, their temples in the mountains, their philosophy of detachment and reverence for all life, right down to Aang's arrows echoing certain tattoo and marking traditions. And the Fire Nation is built on Imperial Japan, specifically the militaristic, expansionist empire of the early 20th century, a technologically advanced island nation waging a war of conquest across a continent. That last one is not a small detail, and once you see it, the story reads differently. A powerful island empire, industrially ahead of its neighbors, launching an aggressive war to subjugate the mainland. Committing atrocities in the name of its own superiority is a very specific historical echo, and the creators have been open that it was deliberate. It is part of why the Fire Nation is not a cartoon evil empire, but a real one, a place with a beautiful culture and good people that has been captured by a nationalist ideology, which is a far more honest and more uncomfortable portrait than most children's shows would attempt. And I want to frame this correctly because it is not a fan theory in the sense of the others tonight. It was design intent from the start, not a secret to be uncovered. But it belongs here because so many viewers absorbed the series as children without noticing it and rediscovered it as adults. And that rediscovery feels exactly like a theory confirming itself. The moment you realize the story you loved was quietly built on real history the whole time. The arrow tattoos are worth a sentence of their own because there is a lovely piece of in-world logic to them that people sometimes wonder about. Aang's blue arrows running over his head and down his limbs are not random. They mimic the natural markings of the sky bison, the great flying animals that were the original airbending masters, the first teachers of the art. The airbenders mark themselves in the image of the creatures they learned from, so a master airbender wears the pattern of the animal that taught his people to fly. That is not a theory, it is canon, but it is the kind of quiet world building that rewards you for asking why, and the answer is always more thought through than you expect. And the way a new avatar is found rewards the same curiosity. When one avatar dies, a new one is born into the next nation in the cycle, and the order runs fire, then air, then water, then earth, repeating because Wan, the first avatar, learned firebending first. But how do they know which child is the avatar? The answer, shown in the first show, is a test, and it is drawn straight from a real practice, the Tibetan method for identifying the reincarnation of a lama. The child is presented with thousands of toys, among which are hidden 4 specific relics that belong to past avatars. And the true avatar, without being told, will be drawn to those 4, choosing them out of the pile as if recognizing old friends. Aang, as a small boy, chose all 4, and that is how the monks knew. It is a beautiful borrowing, a real spiritual tradition woven into the mechanics of a fantasy world. And it is one more example of the thing that makes this franchise so durable, that its invented rules almost always have a real root, so they feel discovered rather than made up. Now let me tell you about the friendship that started the whole war, because it is the deepest piece of backstory in the first show, and it hides a family twist that lands like a gut punch. Aang's immediate past life, the avatar before him, was a Fire Nation man named Roku. And Roku, as a young man, had a best friend, closer than a brother, and that friend was named Sozin. And Sozin grew up to be Fire Lord Sozin, the very man who would launch the 100-Year War and commit the genocide of the air nomads. The two of them, the future avatar and the future architect of the apocalypse, grew up side by side, laughing together, and the story gives you their whole history in an episode late in Book 3, and it is devastating. Because Roku, once he came into his power as the avatar, was the one thing standing in Sozin's way. When Sozin first proposed expanding the Fire Nation into an empire, sharing its prosperity by conquest, Roku refused and warned his old friend that he would not allow it. And for a time, Roku's mere existence held the ambition in check. And then Roku grew old, and a volcano erupted on his home island. And Roku, fighting to save his people, was overwhelmed, and in his final moments he reached out to Sozin, who had come on his airship, and Sozin had a choice. He could save his oldest friend, or he could let the one obstacle to his dream die. And Sozin chose the dream. He left Roku to die in the volcanic fumes, and with the Avatar gone, and knowing the next Avatar would be a defenseless air nomad child, Sozin waited for the comet that bears his name, and used its power to wipe out the air nomads trying to kill the new Avatar before he could grow into a threat. That is how the war began, in a betrayal between two friends, one of whom chose ambition over love. And here is the twist that reframes the entire series. Roku, the Avatar, the good man betrayed, and Sozin, the Fire Lord who started the genocide, both have descendants in the main cast, and they are the same person. Zuko is descended from both of them. Through his father Ozai's line, he is the great-grandson of Sozin, the tyrant. And through his mother Ursa's line, he is the great-grandson of Roku, the Avatar. Zuko carries the blood of the man who started the war, and the blood of the Avatar who tried to prevent it, both at once, and the series frames this as the literal genetic version of his entire arc, the war between the two sides of himself. His grandfather on one side wanted to burn the world, his grandfather on the other side gave his life trying to save it, and Zuko has to choose every day which inheritance he is going to honor. Fans who sensed that Zuko's struggle was somehow the whole show's struggle in miniature were right, and the bloodline makes it literal. He is not just a boy choosing between his father and his uncle. He is a boy in whom the two founders of the entire conflict are at war, and his redemption is the moment Roku finally wins. While we are on the Fire Nation royal family, I want to address the question fans ask most about it, which is what happened to Azula, because it is a case where people badly want a confirmed answer. And the honest truth is that the creators deliberately refused to give one. When the first show ends, Azula is broken, defeated, chained, weeping, her mind shattered by the collapse we talked about earlier. And the natural fan impulse, especially from people who came to pity her once they understood how her father had warped her, is to ask, does she get better? Is she redeemed the way her brother was? Does she find peace? And there are a lot of confident theories out there that answer yes, that lay out a whole arc of Azula's healing. Here is the careful truth. Azula's story does continue in the comics, in more than one of them, and they explore her after the war, unstable, dangerous, sometimes reaching towards something like sanity, and sometimes falling further away from it. But the creators have very pointedly not given her a settled ending. She is not definitively redeemed. She is not definitively locked away forever as a lost cause. Her fate is left deliberately open, an unhealed wound the franchise keeps returning to without closing. And I think that openness is a choice worth respecting rather than resolving, because Azula is the show's hardest case, the child who got the full weight of Ozai's cruelty with none of the escape routes Zuko found, and a tidy redemption would cheapen how much damage was done to her, while a flat condemnation would ignore that she was a victim before she was a villain. So when you see a video or a post stating as fact that Azula was redeemed or that Azula ended up institutionalized forever, treat both with suspicion. The real answer is that the people who made her decided her story was not finished and left the door ajar on purpose. Some theories do not turn out true or false. Some are simply left open, and Azula is the great open question of the whole saga. And now let me give you the one I promised at the very start, the one that is the reason this whole idea of theories turning true has such a hold, because it is the biggest and the clearest and, for a lot of people, the most personally meaningful confirmation the franchise ever gave. Korrasami, the relationship between Korra, the Avatar herself, and Asami Sato, the brilliant engineer and heiress who becomes one of her closest companions. Let me lay out how it actually developed, because the shape of it matters and it is more interesting than the simple version. When Asami is introduced, early in the sequel, she is set up as a romantic interest for one of the male characters, and she and Korra are at first positioned almost as rivals, two young women who at one point are interested in the same man. There was no grand plan at the start for them to end up together. The creator Brian Konietzko has been very open about this, that Korrasami was not the endgame they mapped out from episode 1, that Asami was originally conceived as something else entirely, at one early stage even imagined as a duplicitous character, a spy. So the thing that fans eventually championed was not a secret the writers had planted from the beginning. It was something that grew in the writing and in the watching over years. What happened is that as the series went on, the friendship between Korra and Asami deepened into the emotional center of the whole show. They supported each other through loss and trauma in ways the other relationships did not match. When Korra was at her lowest, poisoned and broken and unable to face anyone, it was Asami she wrote to, Asami whose letter she answered. The two of them kept becoming more central to each other, and a large part of the audience started to read that closeness as romantic and started to hope and started to argue for it, often against people telling them they were imagining it, projecting, reading too much into a friendship between two women. That argument, that specific frustration of seeing something real on the screen and being told it is not there, is one that a lot of viewers know from their own lives, which is part of why this particular confirmation meant so much to so many. And then came the finale. In the last scene of the entire series, with the war over and the new spirit portal open in Republic City, Korra and Asami decide to take a vacation together, just the two of them, into the spirit world. And they walk toward that new portal, and they take each other's hands, and they turn to face one another, and the two of them look into each other's eyes as the golden light rises around them. And the series ends on that image, the two women stepping into a new world together, hand in hand. For anyone who had been hoping, it was unmistakable. For anyone who had been dismissive, it was, at the very least, deliberately staged to look exactly like the beginning of a romance. And then the creators did the thing that moves us out of interpretation and into confirmed canon, the thing that is the whole reason this video exists. A few days after the finale aired, both creators wrote about it directly, publicly, in plain language. Brian Konietzko wrote a post that has become famous in which he said, and I will quote it because the wording matters, "Korrasami is canon." He wrote that you can celebrate it, embrace it, accept it, get over it, or whatever you feel the need to do, but there is no denying it that it is the official story. And his co-creator Michael DiMartino wrote his own post, explaining that the final scene was meant to be as clear as possible that Korra and Asami have romantic feelings for each other, that entering the spirit portal together symbolizes their evolution from being friends to being a couple. There was no ambiguity left. The creators stated without hedging that the two women were in love and that this was intended and real. I do want to be clear about the one thing that gets flattened in the retelling, because it is important and it is often gotten wrong in both directions. This was not planned from the start, and Konietzko said so plainly, so it is not accurate to claim the writers had been secretly building Korrasami since the first episode. But it is also not accurate, and it is frankly a little insulting to say the fans simply invented it and the creators caved to pressure, because DiMartino's own words are that the finale was constructed deliberately to portray them as becoming a couple. The truth is in between, and it is more beautiful than either extreme. A reading that started in the audience became true in the text, because the writers, watching the same relationship deepen that the fans were watching, came to the same conclusion and then made it real and then confirmed it in words. And there is one more honest note that the story was made under broadcast standards that limited how far it could go, which is why the finale gives you a held gaze and clasped hands rather than a kiss, a restraint the creators have acknowledged. But the relationship did not end there. It continues explicitly in the canon comics that follow, where Korra and Asami are unambiguously a couple, the handhold made into a whole life together. Of every theory we have talked about tonight, this is the one that traveled the furthest from a thing fans were mocked for seeing all the way to the official, stated, printed truth. That is the climb this whole video is about. And Korrasami climbed all of it. One of the quiet pleasures of the sequel, and one that fans spent a lot of energy mapping out before the series filled it all in, is the way the entire modern world of Korra is built out of the children and the choices of the first show's heroes. When you sit down and trace it, the whole setting is a family album. The first series ends with a group of teenagers who saved the world, and the second series opens 70 years later in a world those same teenagers built. And almost every major institution and city and character can be traced back to one of them. Aang and Katara's line gives you the Airbenders, Tenzin and his children, the reborn Air Nation that drives so much of the sequel's plot, and it gives you the memory of Aang himself, whose statue stands on an island in the bay outside Republic City, a giant figure watching over the city he helped found, so that even in death he presides over the world. Zuko's line gives you Fire Lord Izumi and a fire nation that has finally become a force for peace rather than conquest. The redemption of a whole nation carried in one family. Toph's line gives you the police force that keeps Republic City standing and the metal city of Zaofu, order and art descended from the same blind woman. And the city itself, the great modern metropolis where it all happens, is the thing Aang and Zuko built together out of the ashes of the war. The world of the sequel is not a new world at all. It is the first show's characters grown old and the shape their lives left behind. And the industrialization is part of that. And it is one of the boldest choices the creators made, one that fans debated before it arrived. The first show is a pre-modern world, a world of ships and ostrich horses and hand-to-hand war. The sequel jumps forward into a world of automobiles and radios and skyscrapers and electricity, a 1920s feeling world of jazz and industry. And that leap forward is not an accident of aesthetics. It is a statement about what the peace Aang won actually produced. Take away 100 years of total war, and a world races forward. The technology of the sequel is the peace dividend of the first show's victory, the thing that becomes possible once the nations stop pouring everything into fighting each other. Fans who wondered what the world would look like once the war was truly over got their answer. And the answer was a world that grew up fast, that industrialized and modernized, and in doing so, created whole new problems. The old heroes never had to face the tension between benders and non-benders, the corruption of a big city, the collision of spirits with machines. The peace did not create a paradise. It created a modern world with modern troubles, which is a far more honest thing for the sequel to have imagined. There is a smaller confirmed connection that fans love to trace, and it is about the villains as much as the heroes, because the sequel took care to root even its antagonists in the first show's world. Amon and Tarlok, as we said, come from Yakane, whom Aang personally defeated. The Red Lotus, Zaheer's group, were imprisoned years before the series by a team that included Sokka, Tonrak, Tenzin, and Zuko, 4 figures spanning both shows, working together to capture the criminals who had tried to kidnap the child Korra. So even the sequel's threats have their roots tangled in the first show's cast, which is part of why the 2 series feel like one continuous history rather than a story and its spin-off. The people who fought the 100-Year War did not simply retire. They kept shaping the world, kept making the decisions, kept fighting the new fights, right up until age took them one by one. And the sequel is, in a real sense, about a generation living in the long shadow of its parents' war, which is, in the end, a remarkably grown-up idea for either show to have. Now let me do the gentle work of setting down the theories that never made the climb, because a video about theories that turned out true owes you an honest account of the ones that turned out false, or that were never confirmed at all, no matter how often they get repeated as fact. This is the cool down, the part where we clear away the myths, and I want to do it calmly because none of these are anyone's fault. They are just the natural silt that builds up around a story people love this much. The biggest one, the one I've been circling all night, is the family tree. There is a widespread, deeply rooted belief that Toph and Sokka ended up together, that the crush we talked about became a marriage, and that Toph's daughters in the sequel, Lin and Suyin Beifong, are therefore Sokka's children too. It is everywhere. And it is false. The sequel is explicit about this because in a later season, Toph herself talks about her daughter's fathers, and she names Lin's father as a man called Kanto, a name that has nothing to do with Sokka. And Suyin, the younger daughter, has a different father again, an unnamed man, which is why Lin and Suyin are half-sisters, sharing a mother but not a father. Sokka fathered neither of them. Toph never married Sokka. The crush was real, we established that, confirmed by the creators, but it stayed a one-sided crush and nothing more, and the elaborate family tree people have built, with little Beifong children who are half Sokka, simply does not exist in canon. I understand why people want it. Toph and Sokka are both wonderful, and the idea of them together is charming. But wanting a thing does not make it canon, and this is probably the single most repeated false fact in the entire fandom. Lin's father is Kanto. Say it with me. Kanto. The second false certainty is one we touched on already, but it belongs in this closing accounting. Fire Lord Izumi, Zuko's daughter, is confirmed. Who her mother is not. The overwhelmingly popular assumption is that Zuko married Mai, his girlfriend from the first show, and that Mai is therefore Izumi's mother. And it is a perfectly reasonable guess they were a couple, it would be tidy. But the shows never confirm it. It is never stated on screen that Mai is Izumi's mother, or even that Zuko and Mai stayed together for life. So it lives in the same category as the space sword being linked to Yue, a lovely, likely, but unconfirmed idea that a lot of people have promoted to fact without noticing they did it. I am not telling you it is false, the way the Sokka family tree is false. I am telling you it is unconfirmed, which is a different thing. And the honest position is to hold it lightly as a probable guess rather than a settled truth. The third one is about the little winged lemur, and we can be quick because we covered it. But it is worth restating in the cool down because it is so common. Momo is not confirmed to be the last of his kind. Appa is the last of the flying bison. That framing is real, and it is part of the show's grief over the air nomad genocide. But Momo gets folded into the same sadness by fans who assume he too is the last of his species, and the sequel later disproves it by showing winged lemurs alive and well decades later. So Appa, yes, a survivor of a slaughtered people. Momo, no, just a lemur, one of many, which is a small mercy in a show that does not hand out many. Then there are two ideas that are less about a single fact and more about the way people talk about the story, and I want to address them because they come up constantly. The first is the reputation of a particular episode, an early Book 1 episode called The Great Divide, which has a long-standing reputation as the worst episode of the series. And there is a piece of fandom lore that says the creators wrote it badly on purpose, that they deliberately sabotaged it, made it as dull as they could as some kind of joke or protest. That is a distortion. What is true is that the people who made the series do not think highly of that episode. They have described it as filler, a weaker installment, and the story even makes a small joke at its own expense about it later. But there is no evidence that anyone deliberately wrote a bad episode on purpose. Disliking something you made in hindsight and sabotaging it on purpose are very different claims, and the internet has gradually upgraded the first into the second over the years. The episode is just a weaker episode. That is all. Stories have those. The second is bigger and stranger, and it is the family of theories that try to connect Avatar to completely different shows and franchises. The shared universe theories, the ones that claim Avatar secretly takes place in the same world as some other cartoon connected by some hidden thread. Those are all false. They are fun, internet games, the kind of thing people assemble late at night out of coincidental visual similarities. But there is no canonical connection between Avatar and any unrelated franchise. The only true shared universe, the only real continuity, is the one we have spent tonight inside. The link between Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, which are truly the same world about 70 years apart, built by the same creators as one continuous history. That connection is real and load-bearing. Every other crossover you have heard whispered is a fan's daydream and a fun one, but not the truth. And I will close the cooldown by circling back to the two we already set down earlier, so they are all in one place in your memory as you drift. The cabbage merchant is not a secret master of the White Lotus. That is a beloved joke and nothing more, though his descendants really did build a corporation, so the man got a legacy. Just an industrial one and not a mystical one. And Sokka's space sword is really made from a meteorite, but it has no mystical link to the moon or to Yue. That connection is a poem the fans wrote and the series never signed. Hold those two the right way, the mundane halves true, the magical halves myth, and you will be ahead of most of the internet. I find there is something worth pausing on in that whole list of false theories taken together because they are not random. Look at what fans wanted to be true. They wanted Toph and Sokka to have a family. They wanted Momo to matter as much as Appa. They wanted the Cabbage Man to secretly be important. They wanted Sokka's sword to carry the ghost of his lost love. Almost every false theory is an act of tenderness, an attempt by the audience to give the characters more love, more meaning, more connection than the text actually granted them. Nobody makes up a theory that a beloved character was secretly evil for no reason. The myths this fandom builds are almost all generous ones, and I think that tells you something lovely about what the story did to the people who watched it. It made them want to take care of these characters, to knit them closer together, to make sure no one was the last of their kind and no crush went unrequited and no minor figure was truly minor. The false theories are wrong, but they are wrong in the direction of love. and that is a rare thing for a story to inspire. There is a theory the first show almost invites you to hold, that the war ended cleanly, that once Ozai was defeated and Zuko took the throne, the world simply healed. And the comics that follow the series exist partly to tell you that this is not how peace works, and fans who suspected the aftermath would be messy were right. The graphic novels the creators wrote to bridge the two shows spend a lot of their pages on a problem the finale left untouched. The Fire Nation had spent 100 years planting colonies across the Earth Kingdom, whole towns and cities of Fire Nation people living on conquered land. And after the war, the obvious just solution was to remove them, to give the land back, to undo the occupation. Aang and Zuko both agree to it at first. And then they discover that it is not simple at all, because those colonies are not military camps anymore. They are home. Generations of Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom people have lived side by side there, intermarried, raised children who are both, built lives that cannot be cleanly sorted back into two nations. To undo the occupation at that point would mean tearing apart families and expelling people from the only home they have ever known. And that dilemma, which the comics take seriously and do not solve easily, is the actual origin of the idea that becomes Republic City. The realization that you cannot unmix people who have already become one community, that the answer to 100 years of conquest is not to draw the old borders back but to build something new that belongs to everyone, is what leads Aang and Zuko toward founding a place with no single nation, a home for the mixed and the in-between. So the great modern city of the sequel is born out of the hardest, least glamorous problem of the piece, the problem of what to do with the children of an occupation. I find that a braver story than a clean ending would have been, because it admits that winning a war is the easy part, and that the real work, the messy, unsolvable human work, starts the day after. The comics also do something with Zuko in that period that pays off a fear the first show planted, which is his terror of becoming his father. As the new Fire Lord, faced with impossible decisions and constant threats on his life, Zuko starts to feel the pull of the ruthlessness he was raised in. The sense that a strong leader has to be hard, has to be feared, has to be willing to do terrible things for stability. And at his lowest, he does something that tells you how frightened he is of himself. He goes to visit his imprisoned father again and again, trying to understand him. And he asks Aang to promise that if he, Zuko, ever becomes the kind of tyrant his father was, Aang will end him. The boy who refused to fight his father in an Agni Kai grows into a man so afraid of his own bloodline that he asks his best friend to be prepared to kill him. Fans who watched the first show and worried that becoming Fire Lord would be its own kind of trap for Zuko, that the throne itself might corrupt the redeemed prince, were reading him correctly, and the comics honor that worry instead of pretending the crown fixed everything. Let me pull back now and talk about why this show, more than almost any other, produces this particular experience. The experience of a theory turning out to be true, because I do not think it is an accident, and I think it is the real reason we are all still here talking about it decades later. Avatar was made by people who decided, early and on purpose, to treat their child audience as intelligent. They built a world with real rules, rules about the moon and the sun, about blood and metal and energy, about lineage and reincarnation. And then they respected those rules with a consistency that most adult drama never manages. And when you build a world that is truly consistent, something wonderful happens. The audience can reason inside it. A viewer can look at Yue's white hair, or Toph's stillness when Jet lies, or the way Azula flinches when she talks about her mother, and draw a conclusion and be right, because the world holds together tightly enough that inference actually works. Most shows do not reward that kind of attention, because most shows are not built carefully enough to survive it. Avatar is. That is the deep reason the theories keep coming true. The series was engineered deliberately to be figured out. And there is a second thing on top of that, which is that the creators kept engaging. They did not build the world and walk away. They did the pop-up commentary that told you, for the record, that Jet is dead. They did the convention appearances that teased the cabbage merchant's legacy. They wrote the comics that answered Ursa and the colonies. They wrote the posts that confirmed Korrasami in plain words. Over and over, across almost 20 years now, the people who made this world have come back to tell the fans, yes, you saw that right, or no, that part you made up, but here's the real answer. That ongoing conversation between a story and the people who love it is rare, and it is most of what tonight has really been about. Not just a list of guesses that turned out true, but a portrait of a story that stayed in dialogue with its audience long after it was over, that kept confirming and correcting and deepening, that treated the people watching as partners in figuring out what it all meant. Let me give you one more from the first show before we close, because it is my favorite piece of confirmed lore in the whole series. And it is a theory turning true about as literally as a theory can, a thing everyone in the story believes is gone that turns out to be alive. For most of Avatar, you are told the dragons are extinct. Firebending, the story goes, was originally learned from the dragons, the first firebenders, the masters of the art, but they were hunted to extinction generations ago, and hunting down the last dragon became the ultimate mark of honor for a Fire Nation warrior. Zuko's own uncle, Iroh, is famous in the legend as the man who killed the last dragon, which earned him the title Dragon of the West. So by the time of the series, the dragons are supposed to be a memory, a beautiful dead thing, the way the air nomads are a beautiful dead thing. And then, in a Book 3 episode, the Firebending Masters, that turns out to be a lie, a merciful lie. Zuko, now traveling with Aang and struggling because his firebending has weakened, goes with Aang to seek out the origins of their art, and they find an ancient civilization thought long gone, the Sun Warriors, still alive, still keeping the old ways. And the Sun Warriors are protecting a secret, the greatest secret in the Fire Nation. There are still 2 dragons alive. 2? A pair named Ran and Shaw, kept and revered by the Sun Warriors, the true last masters of firebending. And the reveal about Iroh is the beautiful part. Iroh never killed the last dragon. He found these 2 and he learned from them, and he chose to lie to the entire Fire Nation, to say he had killed the last dragon, precisely so that no one would ever come hunting them. He sacrificed his own honest reputation, let the world believe he had committed this great slaughter in order to protect the last 2 of a sacred species. It is completely in character, and it recolors the title Dragon of the West into something the opposite of what everyone assumed, a title he earned by saving dragons, not killing them, and letting the world think the worst. And what Ran and Shaw teach Aang and Zuko is the heart of the whole thing, the real meaning of firebending. And it is a correction of the theory the Fire Nation itself had been operating on for 100 years. The Fire Nation taught that firebending comes from rage, from hatred, from the will to destroy, that anger is the fuel. And the dragons teach the opposite. They show Zuko and Aang that fire in its true form is not destruction at all. It is energy, it is life, it is warmth and the sun and the pulse of living things. The original firebenders did not draw their power from anger. They drew it from the same life force that makes everything grow. The Fire Nation had taken a beautiful, living art and hollowed it out into a weapon powered by hate. And in doing so, they had made their own firebending smaller and weaker than it was meant to be. This is why Zuko's fire had faltered, because he had been powering it with rage his whole life and he was running out of rage to burn. When he learns to draw it from life instead, his firebending comes back stronger and truer than before. I love this because it is the show's entire philosophy compressed into one lesson about one element. The idea that the thing you were taught to fear, the thing framed as pure destruction, is actually at its root about life and creation, and that a whole nation had corrupted something beautiful by teaching its children to power it with anger, is the most Avatar idea imaginable. And it connects to the lightning we talked about, because lightning, the cold fire, requires the absence of rage. The same principle from a different direction. Fire, done right, is not hot with hatred. It is either warm with life or cold with calm. And rage was always the impurity, never the source. The dragons were not extinct. The truth of firebending was not destruction. Both of the things the Fire Nation was most certain of turned out to be wrong, and 2 living dragons and an old man's kind lie proved it. And there is a quiet payoff to this that lands 70 years later, if you're watching for it. In the sequel, the elderly Zuko travels the world on the back of his own dragon, a creature named Druk, which means that somewhere in the decades between the shows, the 2 dragons the Sun Warriors protected, the 2 that Iroh saved with his lie, did what living things do. They were not the last after all. The species came back, enough that a Fire Lord's grandson could ride one, and every dragon in the sequel's sky is descended from the 2 that a fat old general refused to kill and let the world believe he had slaughtered. The mercy in Book 3 becomes the dragons in Korra's sky. That is the whole show in a single thread, a small act of kindness against the grain of an entire cruel culture, paying off unseen generations later. Before I let you go, let me clear up a knot of mechanics that people tangle constantly, because getting it straight is part of respecting how carefully these rules were built. And it touches several of the theories we have walked through. There are, across the two shows, a few different ways a person can lose their bending, and they are not the same thing. And confusing them leads people to state all sorts of wrong lore with total confidence. The first is chi blocking, the fighting style used by the warrior Tai Li in the first show and by the Equalists in the sequel. A chi blocker strikes precise points on the body, jabbing at the nerves, and temporarily shuts off a bender's ability to bend, along with often numbing the limb entirely. But the word there is temporary. Chi blocking wears off. It is a way to win a fight, not a way to erase a person's power. Tai Li is terrifying in a brawl precisely because she can neutralize a powerful bender for a few minutes with her fingertips, but the bending always comes back. The second way is what Amon appeared to do, the permanent removal of bending, and this is the one people get most wrong because Amon dressed it up as spiritual. As we established, it was psychic bloodbending, an application of the darkest waterbending art so refined it could reach into a person and sever their connection to their bending, seemingly for good, mimicking the one power that could truly do it. And the one power that could truly do it is the third way, energy bending. The Avatar's ancient technique from the lion turtle, the thing Aang used on Ozai. Energy bending is the only method shown that can permanently remove bending as a matter of true spiritual power rather than as a blood-bending trick. And it is also, crucially, the only thing that can reverse Amon's work. When Amon stripped people of their bending, it looked hopeless, until it turned out that the Avatar's energy bending could restore what his blood bending had taken. Aang, appearing to Korra in spirit, restores her bending after Amon takes it, and Korra in turn restores it to others. So the circle closes. The Avatar's power gives, and the Avatar's power gives back, and the villain's imitation of it, however terrifying, was never the real thing and could always be undone by the real thing. 3 different mechanisms, chi blocking, blood bending, energy bending, that a lot of people smear into one vague idea of taking someone's bending away. And the story is far more precise than that. While I am tidying rules, let me correct the one about the comet, because it is probably the commonest mechanical mistake fans make. Sazan's comet, the great celestial event the whole first series builds toward, does not weaken firebending, and it does not remove it. It does the opposite. When the comet passes, roughly once every 100 years, it amplifies firebending enormously, granting firebenders the power, as the story puts it, of 100 suns. That is why the final battle is set during the comet, because it is the moment the Fire Nation is at its most dangerous, when Ozai intends to use that god-like power to burn the entire Earth Kingdom to ash in a single day. The thing that removes firebending is a different celestial event entirely, a solar eclipse, when the moon blocks the sun, which is the whole basis of the Day of Black Sun invasion we talked about. So the sun covered by the moon takes fire away, and the comet blazing overhead makes fire unstoppable. And mixing those two up, thinking the comet is a weakness rather than the ultimate strength, gets the entire stakes of the finale backwards. The heroes were not waiting for the comet. They were racing to beat it. There is a lovely symmetry in all of these rules, and it is worth naming as we wind down because it is the architecture underneath every theory we confirmed tonight. Fire answers to the sun, water answers to the moon. Firebending is strongest under the comet and vanishes in an eclipse. Waterbending is strongest under the full moon. The moon spirit is a girl who gave her life, the art of bloodbending perverts. The moon's gift into control, and the art of healing uses water for mercy. Metal bending works because nothing refined is ever perfectly pure, and platinum, the one metal too pure to hold any trace of earth, is the one metal a metal bender cannot touch, which is why the sequel's machines are built from it. Every rule rhymes with another rule. The world is a lattice, and that is exactly why standing inside it and reasoning your way to a hidden truth actually works. Why a kid watching this show can guess the ending of a character arc from the color of her hair or the stillness of a blind girl listening to a lie. The theories come true because the world was built to be true to itself, all the way down. There is a piece of the first show that looked like a strange, dreamy detour, and turned out to be spiritually one of the weightiest places in the entire world. And the way the sequel confirmed it is worth a moment. In a Book 2 episode about a swamp, the group is pulled into a vast, misty wetland where they start having visions, seeing people they have lost, and they meet a group of swamp-dwelling waterbenders who bend the water inside the plants and the mud. And one of them explains the strange truth of the place. The whole swamp, he says, is not many trees, but one, a single enormous banyan grove tree whose roots spread out under everything for miles, so that every plant and every creature in the swamp is connected, part of one living thing. And he takes it further into the show's whole philosophy that this is true of the entire world, that all life is connected, that the divisions between people and places and even between the living and the dead are more like the branches of one tree than truly separate things. At the time, it plays as a lovely, slightly trippy bit of spiritual teaching, the kind of thing a wise hermit says. And then the sequel made it literal and made it central. The foggy swamp turns out to be one of the great spiritual centers of the world, the site of that same colossal banyan grove tree, a place where the barrier between the physical world and the spirit world is thin, a genuine hub of the world's spiritual energy. It is no accident that this is where the elderly Toph chose to spend her final years of all the places in the world. The blind woman who feels everything through her connection to the earth, retiring to the one place where everything is connected through a single tree. And the swamp threads through Korra's own spiritual journey, its roots and its visions surfacing at key moments. The theory, if you can even call it a theory, that the swamp's talk of all life being one was not just pretty hermit wisdom, but a real feature of how this world works, was confirmed. The tree was telling the truth. Everything really is connected in the literal cosmology of the series, and the muddy little detour in Book 2 was already laying out the spiritual physics the sequel would build whole seasons on. There is one last relationship I want to talk about because it is the biggest example in the whole franchise of a theory that a huge part of the audience believed in, argued for, poured years of feeling into. And that never came true, and I think it deserves to be handled with respect rather than mockery, because being wrong about who two characters should love is about as human a way to be wrong as there is. The two shows I've been talking about are, at their center, about a boy and a girl who found each other at the very beginning. Katara, the waterbender who pulled Aang out of the ice in the first episode, and Aang, the Avatar, the last airbender who loved her from almost the moment he woke up. And across 3 seasons, the story builds their relationship carefully through his obvious devotion and her slower, more complicated coming around, and it pays it off in the finale where they finally kiss. And the sequel confirms that they married and had 3 children together and spent their lives as partners. Aang and Katara is the canon romance, the endgame the first show was always building toward. That is not in question. But it was, for years, ferociously in question among fans because of a different pairing that a large and passionate part of the audience wanted instead. They wanted Katara with Zuko, the pairing people came to call Zutara, the waterbender, and the scarred prince. And if you were anywhere near this fandom in its early years, you know how intense that argument got, how completely people believed in it. And I understand the appeal, I really do, because on a certain level the two of them have a magnetic quality on screen, all that tension and history, the enemies who keep being forced together, the sense that they had each suffered in ways that mirrored each other, both marked by the war, both carrying dead or missing mothers, both fierce in a way Aang's gentleness was not. There is a scene deep in the Earth Kingdom in the crystal caves beneath Ba Sing Se, where Katara and Zuko are trapped together and she comes closer to him than she ever does to anyone else outside her own family, offers to try to heal his scar with her precious spirit water. And for a moment, it feels like the series is opening a door. And then Zuko betrays her in that very episode, siding with his sister, and the door slams. But the moment was enough to launch 1,000 theories that these two were the real love story, and the story would eventually admit it. It never did. Zuko and Katara were never a romance in canon, not in the series, not in the comics, not in a word from the creators. The near moment in the caves was exactly that. A near moment, and it was arguably designed to make Zuko's betrayal hurt more, not to seed a romance. Katara ended with Aang always, and Zuko ended, as far as the story goes, with Mai, and later, in his old age, alone with his dragon and his daughter, and his long work of keeping the peace. The Zutara theory is probably the single most passionately held false theory the franchise ever produced, believed harder than the Sokka family tree, argued longer than any question of who could bend what, and it never turned true. I include it here at the end on purpose because it is the necessary counterweight to everything else tonight. This whole video has been a celebration of the audience being right, of guesses climbing into truth, of the lovely feeling of having seen something before it was confirmed. But the Zutara fans were paying exactly the same kind of close, loving attention that the fans who called the Amon reveal were paying. They were reading the chemistry, the parallels, the loaded scene in the caves, and building a theory out of real textual threads, the same way everyone else did. They just happened to be reading threads the writers had woven for a different purpose. And that is worth remembering because it keeps us honest. Attention does not guarantee you are right. A theory can be intelligent and well-supported and deeply felt, and still simply not be where the story was going. The confirmed theories tonight are thrilling precisely because confirmation was never guaranteed. Because for every Korrasami that climbed all the way up, there is a Zutara that did not, believed just as hard by people just as smart. The difference between them was not the quality of the fans' attention, it was only which way the story chose to go. And there is something worth respecting in the people who wanted Zutara and did not get it because they loved the series enough to imagine more for it. And being wrong in that direction, again, is a kind of generosity. They wanted these wounded kids to heal each other. The story just had a different healing in mind. So what does it actually mean in the end that so many of these guesses turned out to be real? I have been thinking about that all the way through tonight, and the part that gets me is not any single confirmation, not even Korrasami marquee as it is. It is the pattern, it is what the pattern says about the relationship between a story and the audience that gives it real attention. When a show rewards a careful viewer with a confirmed truth, it is making a kind of promise and keeping it. It is saying, you were right to look closely, you were right to care about the small things, your attention was not wasted. And that is a rarer and more valuable thing than it sounds because so much of what we watch treats our attention as something to be captured and spent, not honored. Avatar honored it. It built a world worth studying and then, over and over, told the people who studied it that they had seen true. And I think that is why this particular franchise inspires the kind of devotion it does. Why people who watched it as children are still, as adults, arguing about Beifong family trees and combustion-bending mechanics and the exact meaning of a hand held at the mouth of a spirit portal. It is not nostalgia, or not only nostalgia. It is that the story earned a level of trust that very few stories earn. It told the truth about grief, about war, about family, about the way cruelty gets passed down and the way it can be refused. It killed characters and meant it. It let its villains be children who were hurt, and its heroes be flawed, and its answers be complicated. And when it planted something, it paid it off, sometimes on screen, sometimes in a comic a decade later, sometimes in a single dry caption that said, "For the record." A story that keeps its promises for 20 years teaches its audience that it is safe to believe in it, and that belief is the thing that outlives the series. There is something almost tender in the whole arrangement, the way a generation of viewers and a small group of creators have kept this quiet conversation going for so long, guessing and confirming, hoping and being told yes or no. The theories that turned out true are the moments in that conversation where the audience and the authors met in the middle and agreed on what the story was. Jet is dead. Amon was a bloodbender. Iroh found peace among the spirits. Zaheer flew when he had nothing left to hold him down. Toph built a police force out of the art she invented in a cage. 2 dragons survived because a kind man lied. And Korra and Asami loved each other and always had. And the people who made them said so out loud. Each of those is a small handshake across the screen, a place where what you felt watching turned out to be exactly what they meant. That is the best thing a story can give you, the feeling that you were understood and that you understood it back. Avatar has been part of people's lives now for the better part of 2 decades, passed from older siblings to younger ones, rewatched in hard years, quoted and studied and loved, and it has more than earned its place among the stories that a culture keeps. It was a show for children that never once talked down to them, and the reward for that respect is that the children grew up and did not leave it behind. They kept looking, and the story kept looking back, and the theories kept coming true, because it turns out that when you make something carefully enough and honestly enough, the people who love it will understand it better than you might ever expect. And every so often they will see the ending before you show it to them, written right there in the white of a girl's hair. So that is where we will leave it tonight, with all of it laid out, the guesses that climbed all the way up into the truth, and the lovely wrong ones that never did, and the strange, patient, decades-long conversation between a story and an audience that could not stop thinking about it. If you have been drifting for a while now, that is exactly as it should be, and you do not need to hold on to any of the names or the numbers. They will still be here. Let the world of the four nations settle over you like a blanket. The moon over the water, the two dragons somewhere in the dark, the two women stepping into the light, hand in hand. Rest easy, you saw it true. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.